My name is Barry Loveland. I'm an oral history interview with the LGBT Center of Central Pennsylvania History Project. And I'm here with Lana Malmsheimer, who's our videographer. And today is August 21st, 2014, and we're here interviewing Lawrence von Barann at the LGBT Center in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Do you prefer I call you Lawrence or Larry?
Larry will be fine.
Okay, great. Larry, do I have your permission to interview you for the history project?
Yes, you do.
Great. We have a consent form that I'll ask you to sign at the completion of the interview. And at that time, you can decide if you want to place any restrictions on the use of the interview. Also, let me assure you that at any time during the interview, if you want us to turn off the video camera, we can do that. If you want to decline to answer any question, you can do that. And if you need to take a break during the interview, just let me know.
Okay.
All right. So let me start.
Can you hold 1 minute?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Should we start from the top?
I think we're good.
Okay. So let me start by asking you to state your full name.
Lawrence von Barann,
Okay.
3 parts.
Okay. And it's small V-O-N, correct?
Small V-O-N, capital B-A-R-A-N-N.
Good. Okay. When and where were you born?
I was born in Queens County, New York City, right on the borderline of Brooklyn, in a very old neighborhood named Ridgewood.
Okay.
And from there we moved, there was a trolley line that went all the way to Jamaica out in Queens. And eventually, my mother, who liked to move a great deal, something about moving was fun in those days. We moved from Ridgewood to Glendale and down the line. And now sometimes you'd only move 2 blocks away. But she was thrilled. It was a new apartment. I've been thinking of that lately about, that's crazy, to do that, but okay, you didn't have much furniture, 3 people, so we moved. And it was a big $25 a month rent. No young people listening to this will ever believe that.
And what date were you born?
The 26th of June, 1928,
Okay. Very good.
just before the fall.
Yes. So tell me something about your family, your parents. What were their names, and what kind of occupations did they have?
All right, my mother's name was Bertha, and she was born in New York City, as her mother before her. So on that side of the family, it's all American. My father was born in Berlin, Germany, and came to the United States when he was in his teens, late teens, and worked himself, learned English, worked himself, worked in what they called shirtwaist shops. My mother worked there, and that's how he met her. She was at a sewing machine. He was one of the owners. They got together, and I was the product eventually. So it's an interesting background to have.
And do you have any siblings, or are you the only child?
I'm the only child.
Okay.
They felt one was enough. No, I think recently I've thought that out too. Older, my mother was very outgoing. My father was very quiet. And I think his fantasy was, since he now was working in New York City for the Ford Instrument Company, he wanted to live on the west side of town, and it would be a short trip to work. We were in that period, though, when people wanted to get out of New York, and you had Levittown being built on Long Island and things like that. So mother predominated. And I think Daddy didn't, being Germanic, yes, you get married at a certain age, yes, you have a wife, yes, you have a child. I think that's the great loving background for me. Not that he wasn't a loving father, he was a nice father, but not the typical American that goes out and plays baseball with you or anything. We went to museums, we went other places. But I knew in his heart of hearts he wanted to be in Manhattan. I realized that as I was growing up. And now more than ever I realize that. But Mother wanted to be out there in the boondocks with the farms and the whole thing. So it was a strange beginning.
Mhm. So, what was life like growing up in that household?
The household itself was very friendly. We went on picnics, we went to the beach, my father did like Broadway shows, so we went to see musical comedies. I remember one in particular where I've always met, I want to meet somebody who knows show business. There was a huge variety show on Broadway called Hell's A-Poppin'. And I've never met anyone younger who even knows the word. But I know it was very big in its day. And I can still see my father laughing and practically falling out of his seat at the humor. Some of which now I realize was gay humor, which is even funnier yet. There was a little man named Joe Messer, short, about 5 foot high and 5 foot round, who was the gay comedian in the cast. And he was hysterical. Now, I've got to meet somebody who knows show business way back. I want to find out what happened to Joe and what happened to Hell's A-Poppin' and the whole thing. But no, it was a warm household. My mother cooked, overcooked on occasion. She had been taught by her mother. And so you started making fish like an hour before you served it. Now, you know it came out like cardboard. And I grew up thinking all fillet of fish looked and tasted like cardboard. But otherwise, she made one of the big dinners and chocolate puddings and pies and apples and, all the usual things. And we did most of the eating at home. Going to a restaurant was a very rare occasion. And there were two. One was a Chinese. That stunned me. I didn't know Chinese had a restaurant. And then there was a German-American one, where you got the German cooking. And those were the two that were within an easy distance of our house. So that's where you went, because we had no car. So you used the trolley, or you walked. I walked and walked and walked, which was good for me, I realize now. And, but yes, I just thought it was normal. You get out and you walk. Miles you can walk, all the way into Ridgewood, all the department stores. You walked all the way back. Then I learned there was a trolley eventually. Why didn't we do that? But it was fun. I look back on it with fond memories. Okay, I say fond memories. The one bad memory was this was the time that Hitler was coming into power. And being in a German-American neighborhood, I was too young to know, but it was a problem. Now, my father was a pacifist. He hated Hitler, the whole thing. But we had a Zenith radio set, a big one. And you had a funny dial, and the dial would open up, and there would be short wave. And he would listen to Adolf Hitler on occasion. And he'd slam the thing shut. And I'd ask him, who was that and why, I had a vague idea. And he said, a crazy man. We don't want to hear any of this. And 2 doors down from us was a man who German-American Bund, who went out in full Nazi regalia to the Bund meetings in New York or upstate. And that's all my father had to see, and he was livid, I grew to know the bad symbol. And then one day that same gentleman brought one of his nephews over from Germany, our age, my age. Every kid in the block wanted to kill him. The most arrogant, overbearing bastard if there ever was one. So that was my introduction. Also, the local newspaper was the Journal American, which Hearst. So you can imagine all the stories. And I was always a newspaper fan, even as a kid. The Daily News and the Journal American when my father came home. And I'd be on the floor reading. And I read all the stuff about Hitler and all that. And I was getting some wild ideas. So I looked around the neighborhood to spot who was a Nazi. I found a few in the basement, you know. When you're a little kid, you can do things like that. But those were wild times.
We were talking about the
I was living in Ridgewood and
Yes.
Glendale.
and your the German neighborhood because
The German neighborhood,
with
yes.
the times of Hitler coming to
Right.
power and everything, it was
Well,
a
then
difficult time.
after we moved there, we were out on the island in Queens at the end of a bus line in farm territory. Because I remember as a kid, I could go half a block and be in the middle of a field of farmers. I'd never had them as a vegetable, a white turnip-like vegetable. And we kids were pulling them out and eating them out the ground, you know. That was a new experience for a kid that came from the city. But it was fun, but it was lonely because I was one of the newcomers way out, and everybody was in closer to where the older neighborhoods were and the school. So I was a weirdo. Again, walking endless blocks to get to work, school. My first clue about being an artist, I have to think back, came from that school. When I was getting ready to be graduated, there was a group of teachers and one male teacher, and they were talking about their students, and I heard my name come up. And so I sat back, and I was far enough away, I was listening, and I heard them say, well, he's really got talent. He should not just go to a regular high school. He should go to the High School of Music and Art. I'd never heard of such a place. There was a local high school, that's where you went. And they were insisting on it. But nobody contacted my parents to tell them that. See? So I go home and I say, I heard this group of people say I should go to the High School of Music and Art. And they look it up and they said, my God, it's on the west side of Manhattan, way uptown. Do you know how long that would take to get there from here? You'd be on the subway day and night, you'd get no work. My mother said, no way, you're not going to do this, you're not going to do this. There's a high school locally, that's where you go. So that was my first clue about art, but it was cut off. Then by the grace of whatever fates there are, I got into that local high school and, you know, I assigned the usual math, English, all the junk. I really didn't care. But there was an art course, and I got into that. And there was a wonderful man named Frederick Wickman. I've never forgotten Fred. And he had an art course. You weren't drawing dumb little drawings. You weren't talking about art history. And the desks were laid out in rows. And there was one desk in the middle. And he put me at that desk. I don't know, there must have been intuition. And he said, now we're starting with a good artist, Picasso. Now, we never heard of Picasso. This was a whole early days. This was 1946. And so he starts off about Cubism. Well, I sat up like it rung a bell. And I went home and I did a boy reading a book with a lamplight as a cubist. I'm not kidding. I still have it. It's salted away. And I was turned on. I couldn't wait to get back to his class. And this is the way he did it. Forget the past. We're talking about the future and the time in which you live. Then he announced that he lived in Manhattan. He was a bachelor. He lived in Manhattan on 53rd, between 3rd and 2nd, which is the jazz club area. but he was in an apartment house. And any student that wanted to meet in his lobby on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock, he would give you a guided tour of museums and private art galleries. Well, I was there maybe at 10 o'clock in the morning, and with a few others, and he did. He took us into the world-famous galleries, the Matisse Gallery, the greatest people who come from Europe, we were in. I was never in buildings like that. You know, the Renaissance-style buildings, the gilded elevators, you know, the charming gentleman greeting you at the door. Well, I was in seventh heaven. Forget the rest of the courses. And I would go home and I would draw at night. Draw at night. By the end of a term, I had a portfolio, baby, that big. And I was meeting some nice people in the class. Now, I didn't know I was gay. I was at that stage in life yet. And there were two girls in the class. And I was attracted to them, but not for the male-female reason. The one was a short little girl named Irene. I remember their names to this day. Irene Haas. And Irene could draw. She could outdraw me. She could draw like Arthur Rackham with the books. And that was her subject matter. And I would watch her, and I mean, oh, she's it. The other, now the war was on, remember, in the USO? The other was a young high school girl who looked 20. I mean, full makeup, spiked heels, and she had long Grecian earrings that looked like a Greek wine jug, and they fascinated me the hell. I kept looking at those earrings, and she'd be talking about her date of the night before, when she took a French sailor out. And she liked French sailors because they had white hats with little red pom-poms. Well, no, I know, to you, you're gagging. She'd stand next to me talking, and I think, this is an angel, this is vision for all time. And her name was perfect, Nancy Valentine. I mean, and I've always thought I should write in the script. No one would believe it, except there is a record of her on the West Coast, okay? And so I had that going on in my mind. At the same time, I'm a young man, and I'm noticing athletes. And I thought, I began drawing them when I got home, from imagination, and putting them in Renaissance clothing. And Irene would walk over and say, where did you get the models? And I said, there's no models. I'm in the boys' bathroom, and they undress, and you make a quick sketch. And she said, oh, look at you, you know. So that's where I did the first modeling. And I would walk. I didn't consciously try to think of a theatrical image, but for some reason I liked the color brown. And I was always dressed in brown, and I got myself a huge black portfolio. Now other people were carrying books to school. Larry's carrying a big black portfolio. And the jocks, who, believe me, were not my world, loved me for it. They always wanted to see what picture I was doing. Hey, here he comes again, you know. And I had no trouble with anybody. Here was the weirdo with the portfolio. And that was my background. And those Saturday visits to all the great museums, and the Morgan Library, and the Frick, and the Met, and the private galleries. The most extraordinary was, before the museum, the Guggenheim, was built, there was a small gallery on 53rd across from the Stork Club, and I knew what the Stork Club was. And it was in a Renaissance building, and one Saturday morning, Mr. Wickman says, we're going to visit this museum of non-objective art, no subject matters. Wow. And he says, and be prepared, the one who's going to guide you around is actually a princess from Europe. So we get there, and the interior of the room, gray carpeting, gray carpet walls, little spotlights, and the paintings stood on the floor in huge silver frames. And they were all just pure color abstractions. And Vivaldi was playing in the background. That's the first I heard of Vivaldi. And I'm a music lover. And I was floating through that gallery. And I got the catalog, and the artists had strange names like Scarlet and other names like that, who I learned later were the princess's boyfriends, some of them. And there was a man named Kandinsky, and the others, they were all in there. And she was the influence behind the building of the Guggenheim Museum. She was also a friend of Mr. Guggenheim's. I'm doing that, I don't know, but I would suspect. She was a very good-looking woman. And so they eventually built the Guggenheim, which is what the Museum of Jack de Art became. And she was filling it with Kandinsky's, and other people were outraged. So after it got all put together and it had its opening, there was a very big collector in New York who couldn't stand the fact that they weren't showing Impressionist paintings and that. So he gave them a collection, a private collection, on the proviso, you make a gallery in that damn museum and you put the Impressionists in. And it's still there to this day. They still have that extra corridor going to a room. And I read about all this and I thought it's the funniest thing. And here we're with the most, and I came home and said to my father, I'm a non-objective artist. My poor father looked at me like, what the hell is he talking about? My mother was still cooking. She didn't care. She didn't have background. And so I said, well, you know, you work with angles and stuff. So I did one. So I said, why don't we go to a gallery one day? And he said, all right, I'll take you up on that. So by then that museum was out. So I said, there's a place called the Museum of Modern Art. Let's go. So we go in, and of course it's Cubism, it's Picasso, and I'm being smart ass. That's a Picasso, Dad. That's a Braque, Dad. And Dad's looking at me, and I said, my high school art teacher. This is where we learn these things. So now we go out in the garden. In those days, the garden was a chain link fence, a reflecting pool, a few tables on pebbles, and you could order a glass of wine or tea. And he sat there with me, and I said, this is my world. And he said, oh, okay. And he said, some of those things up there were very interesting. He liked Moholy-Nagy and other very far-out pieces. And I said, I can't stop thinking about it. It's what I want to do. So he had an early clue. He knew. And he didn't say, don't do it. He just said, wonderful, you found something. So again, he went. Then I said, from here we're going to a Salvador Dali show. And then we get up. And that was in one of those very French galleries. The Rococo furniture, the gold walls, the whole thing. And it's crowded. And of course, there's Dali's, some of his most famous paintings. And my father's looking, and he went from non-objective to Dali. But he was impressed by the audience and the thing. And he said, this is extraordinary. And I said, here's another one that I like, you know. So I gave my father that little tiny introduction, and he knew what the future was going to be like. So when I eventually, I wasn't getting A marks in school, let's face it. I graduated with a B, which I thought was generous to anybody, but I had a portfolio this big, and one day my art instructor says, now that you're graduating, you're due at a meeting in New York at a special thing going on. It's, you'll like it when you get there. So I said in the morning to my mother, I gotta go to New York, it's the west side of town. And of course, it's a great big, formal building. It's the Scholastic Art Awards, and I win a bronze medal. Now everyone's there with their families, and when they announced my name, there was this weak applause. And my mother didn't know, my father didn't know, and I come out, I won a bronze medal, which I brought today in my thing.
Great.
So I went home and I said, "You're doing something right, kid. You know, you're on the subway and I'm looking at my medal saying, it's not gold, but it's a medal, and I won it, you know, for the portfolio." So then the problem is, what do you do with me? And Hofstra was the college that if there was a college, I liked Hofstra out on Long Island. But I knew I wasn't going to make that. So I thought, well, there's art schools. I'll go to an art school. Well, now it's 1946, and the GIs are returning from the war. And part of the deal with the GIs was to pay them $25 a week living expenses, but they should enroll in schools and their tuition would be paid. Suddenly every school in New York, from shoelace tying to hairdressing to whatever, had students. And they all had a little pin of an eagle, which the GIs called the ruptured duck. So, I'm not making this stuff up. And so I would go into an art school with my wild portfolio, and they'd say, "You're just out of high school. We've got 10, 12 GIs who've been in the war." And this went on and on. Finally, I heard of a place called the Art Students League up on 57th Street, dating back to the 1800s. So I walk in there, and they said, "Yeah, we've got an opening. We have a drawing class. Would you like to come in?" And I had my father with me, and he said, "I'll pay the check, the whole thing." And that. He said, "It's only one thing. It's late in the afternoon, so I'd have to come and travel the whole thing, you know, back with the portfolio, do the whole bit." And that was my first exposure to a model coming in the room. Now, we were seated at a huge, I can tell this, everyone's old enough. It's a big table, and all the people are sitting around it, and they're all older than me. And they're advertising types, you know, with little fancy sketch pads. And a beautiful girl sits next to me, and I look at her, and you two are maybe at the right age. It was Simone, the actress. And she's very French. She's here to make quick sketches. So I sit next to Simone, and a model walks out, an older, lean woman with a dress on, right? And she looks around, and she says, "Ho, ho, we have a newbie in the class." Me. And she walks over in front of me, throws off the dress, spreads her legs, and says, "Here it is, baby. Take a good look." And I am now blushing. Simone is laughing. The men in the room are trying not to laugh, but I must have been beat red, and she's standing hands on hip. And I wasn't quick enough to come up with the remark, and all I was fascinated with, she was wearing a gold cross around her neck, and I thought, what does she do after the art students leave? So she made poses, and I got used to it. And I took that class for a while. Then I looked for other openings in the school. And finally, I found one with a famous painter, Reginald Marsh, from the 30s. And I was told by everybody, "This is the class you want to be in." Well, the class, it was a sea of easels, and you could barely see the model because he was the Reginald Marsh. So I said, "Okay, I'll go in that class because he's got the best models." Well, I never saw so many muscled people in my life. And to pose for Reginald, you had to Vaseline your body. So when the spotlight hit, every muscle was closed. And I thought, what a relief from that woman, you know. And one of them I'll never forget. He had a huge black model, a black man. bulging muscles. He came on with a little girl about this big, ballet dancer. She's in a white tutu. He's nude. He takes her up, holds her on his shoulders, and held the pose. And so March says, start drawing. And here's this little girl in a pose. And I thought, this is the world I wanted to be in. This is it, baby. And so I stayed in there as long as I could. I moved to his painting class, where everybody was painting like Reginald Marsh, except one young man next to me. A model would come up. He had a little canvas. He'd paint the perfect portrait, stand back, take turpentine and wipe it out. And I'm going, no, it's beautiful. And I watch him again. He'd paint it over again. And I mean, he wanted to be a professional portrait painter, and this was the way. You don't wipe out paper, you do it on the canvas. So I did all of those lessons. Meantime, still going to the galleries, still drawing, still doing the whole thing, going back and forth to Long Island, entering art shows. And then one day we heard that the Brooklyn Museum in Brooklyn had an art school, and they had openings. So my father says, meet me at West 4th Street on the subway. I'm taking you to Brooklyn. So we went to Brooklyn, and there's the big museum next to a big park, and the whole thing is beautiful. And they get in and they sign me up for a full course. Now I've got a painting instructor, a drawing instructor, a calligraphy instructor. I mean, I'm loaded. And luckily, the man who taught calligraphy was Arnold Bank. Again, he's dead. But he was the most famous calligrapher in New York. Worked for Time magazine, he worked for Life, he worked for everybody. But he was a walking Jewish historian. He'd be teaching lettering, but he'd be talking art history, world history. I learned more from that one man than anyone else I could learn from about the world's history of that. And he even invited me to his home one night, which was a big deal. With two other students, we went to have tea with Mrs. Bank and him. And from there, I was turned on again. The Surrealists were going strong. So was I. I entered my first competitions there and got in them with my work. The man I studied figure drawing with and painting was an excellent painter who was giving, I didn't know it then, but had another course I was taking called Materials and Techniques. Nobody teaches it anymore. But that course, you learned you bought pigment and you put it in a dish and you mixed with oil. You had blank tubes. You learned how much pigment you really got that way compared to a commercial tube. You learned what canvas was and how it was made. Then you covered it with the correct surface. Then you did it with a bad surface. It would go yellow. Again, I was startled out of my wits at what I was learning. Gesso was a word. Ancient Egyptians used it. I was using it. Wax encaustic. Paint with wax. I was using that. Today, no one teaches any of those things any longer. You do what you want. So I'm glad I got the last tail end of it. So that's what really began to lead me on. And while I was there, a man came to teach. I studied engraving, and then a man came named Bernard Brusselschmidt, again, teaching wood engraving. I thought, oh, this is me. I go in his class and we do illustrations. And Bernard's watching me night after night. And after about a term, he comes over and he says, how about, would you like to take a job? And I said, why, are you offering me? And he says, yeah. How would you like to work in my private studio as my private assistant? I have a young man now who's leaving to go to Israel to a kibbutz. I would like a new assistant. you would be good. And he says, we could still do this class. I'll drive you in when I drive in as the teacher. I said, good for you. So I took that course, and I got into his studio, and it was wonderful. Now I'm in a real art studio, Midtown Manhattan, off 44th Street, on 3rd Avenue, you know, the whole bit. And I'm now learning wood engraving and a press. And it came with great ease to me. It's like I was born to sit there with a knife and the block and cut. And then I began collecting prints. You know, now I had a salary. I could buy artwork. And so this is how my career began.
So this was your first job, basically?
The job worked out. I stayed with him for a long time. And I didn't mean to play one-upmanship with him once, but I cut my first abstract figurative piece, a surreal woman. And there was a competition in Washington. The Washington printmakers pay $2, you send your print in. If you get in, you're in the Library of Congress in an exhibition. So I send my print in, and I don't tell Bernie, Brusselman, Bernie. And so when the announcement came, you're in the show. Oh my God, I rushed into work and I said, Bernie, look at this. I'm in the Library of Congress show. And he says, you're in the show? I'm not getting any mailing piece. And I said, but you've got a gallery. Don't they do this for you? He says, obviously they didn't, but you got in the show. And then I thought, Bernie, you hired me, you know. I'm the young genius you wanted. You got it. So I got a ton of experience from him. How to handle clients, to do jobs, as I did that cover of the magazine over there, and other things. And then he had a little trade magazine, The Gift and Art Buyer, for all the gift shops in the United States and so. He says, someone has to do the editorial section, lay out the pictures and so on. You do it. So, okay, now I'm a layout artist, and I'm doing that every month. And I liked it. And I liked doing his research, and I liked doing the prints, and I liked everything about it. But after a while, I began to realize I'd been there too many years. Bernie was getting a little tired of coming into work. I had begun to work as his assistant, going to talk to clients. And he said, I've got a great house with my wife and child and a maid up in Westchester County. Come up to dinner. So I'm worried about this. So I come up to dinner, and it's a beautiful house. The maid is a great cook as well. The wife is a very big-wheel school teacher of French in Manhattan. The kid is a little baby, you know, a little boy. And I come up to dinner, it was wonderful. And Bernie said, how would you like to live here? And I said, no, not really. And he said, why not? And I said, because I'd be with you 24 hours a day. I didn't know it sounded like an insult, but 24 hours a day. So he said, look, there's a big, I got all that woods out there and the gardening, and you could have a studio and all that. I said, no, Bernie, I'm attached to my family. My mother's ill, and my father, and I said, I don't really want to be here 24 hours a day. So eventually I said, I think we've come to the parting of the ways. It's been wonderful working with you. I can give you a little more money. I said, no, it's not that. I think I've outgrown my usefulness to you and to myself. I don't know where I'm moving on to, but I have to move on.
How many years did you work for him?
Oh, I worked with him, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And so I left, and I had a portfolio. A friend of mine lived with me now, not a gay relationship, a wonderful young oh, Catholic boy who had to go to Mass all the time. Yeah, I'm not Catholic, but Irish on top of it. Irish Catholic. Mother goes to church every morning, you know. So he wanted to get away from that. So, okay, things were getting bad. My father died. There I have a mother who's disabled. And I said, why don't you move in with us? And you and I be partners in business. One of us can be here, one of us can be out. My mother thinks you're her son anyway. Her mind was going. She loved them. Hey, I got 2 sons, you know. And so he moved in with us. And it was a great relationship. And we did work, which, again, I brought some of it. We put a portfolio together. We did the suits, the exquisite green portfolio with the prints, you know, our own mailing pieces. We were hot stuff. And suddenly people were giving us $500 for a wooden engraving and $600. But then there'd be those periods when nothing, but you send out more mailing pieces. And I learned to do interviews. And then I'd meet a guy like, you're not bad looking, you know. I said, no, please. This is not what I'm here for. I'm here really for, you know. And I didn't explain that to my partner because I figured he's straight. He's totally straight. And I thought, now on the side, I'm living a gay life. I can go to Manhattan if I want in the evening, and there are all those wonderful bars. And then I can come home and I'm saintly married doing the wood engraving. And I to this day, I approve of double lifestyles. It was a hell of a lot of fun. I really mean it. And I met people in New York on both levels, which was great. So I...
When did you first get a sense that you were gay?
Oh, first gay. All right, when I was in high school, someone had told me my art instructor was gay, Mr. Wickman. And I didn't believe him. But then it turned out the person who told me turned out to be a ballet dancer on Broadway. And he's going with a girl that I know. And then he lets it be known that that's a wonderful front. He's really gay. And so he said, and I've been at parties with Mr. Wickman. And I thought, okay, it's closing in, and I've been into a gay bar. And so it's a funny vignette, but we might as well get it on film. My father drove a Plymouth, and my mother liked to go to let's say, a nightclub out on the island that had dinner, and then you had dancing and so on. Well, now we've got a ballet dancer who's joined the party, and she loved him. He was funny. He was delightful. So she planned this trip. We're going to go to a nightclub. So we drive out there. My father doesn't dance well. He has her out on the dance floor as only a professional could do. We watch this thing. We have dinner. And we're now in the car coming home. And I'm sitting in the back with the ballet dancer, who now makes a move. But Daddy's on the front seat, and I can't say anything. And he's going to town. And he went all the way to town. And of course, I couldn't laugh. Sound. And I thought, Lady, you son of a bitch. He was roaring with laughter. He said, well, you've been holding off from me, so... You know. So I never told Daddy, I never told Mother. And he was a great friend. And through him, I met more Broadway tops. I learned where the dancers went after hours to dance. So I did that. And that introduced me to gay life. And I found it much to my liking. Not every place I went. Some they were very snobbish and pretentious. Mm-hmm. But the village had such a variety. You could find them. And then I found, I'll put this on film also, I found the place I liked best of all, the most notorious one in the village, the mine shaft. Now, the mine shaft was strictly, it was what Berlin was after World War I. And it was exactly like Berlin. But I'll tell you one thing, nothing ever happened to you if you didn't want it to. Everyone was really a gentleman, but it was leather, it was motorcyclists, it was wild. I loved every damn minute of it. It really was top of the line. And I loved the fact when you came out, there was a line of taxis willing to take you. But I just loved the leather set. And some people said, you don't go there. You don't go with the leather people. And I said, they're really nice people. I have a nice time talking to them. Some of them are really executives, you know, and other things in life, and it's great.
Do you
So
remember
I was-
about what year it was that you started going there?
Oh, the late 60s, in the 60s, yes, that's right. And it was absolute fun. I even went to one across from the mine shaft. There's a building closer to the river that's an absolute triangle, and it supposedly had a sign outside hotel. But the ground floor was an equally wild bar that had tunnels under the Hudson. I didn't venture into those. I'm game, but that was a bit much. But what I loved was it was a big bar room, high ceiling, and they had the nude boys on acrobatics doing acts over the bar while you had your drink. Now, I got to admit, that was an exotic thing for a boy from Long Island. And they were good. They were real athletes, you know, and they were always doing these acts over your head. And I thought, I found my world. It's it. It's great. And then I'd walk out in no fear at all. I'd walk from that neighborhood clear across 14th Street to get the subway. And when I think of it, you know, I'm in the meat market area with the meat men. I'm with the whole thing. It's what I never felt fear in my life in that neighborhood wherever I went. Never for a moment did I ever feel fear. And I did have this inner feeling, you're part of it. I'm not a religious person. I do believe there are other forces, something, I don't know what you name it, and those forces guide you. Like when I go places, I usually ended up, there'd be something in surrealism. There'd be a book, there'd be prints. I'd go someplace and I'd see an actor that I've always thought about, and there would be the actor at the next table or walking by. I would do these things. And after a while, I just got it to be, okay, you think about art all the time, you think about the theater and dancing, it's bound to happen. So I get in an elevator one day at Sotheby's, or it was Park Benet then, and there's Garbo standing holding a little flower and the Garbo outfit, and I couldn't help, I just stared. And she looked up and she smiled like, I know what you're doing. And yes, it's Garbo, you know. And I got off the elevator and I thought, I'm going to faint, you know. And this happened a couple of times with people. Lauren Bacall died the other day. I used to go into a building with a gallery, and Lauren Bacall's dentist was on the next floor, and I'd get in the elevator and there'd be Lauren Bacall with that voice, darling, you know. So after a while, I really do have this feeling, if you think in these terms, it happens. Now, you get opportunities. You either take them or you don't. You speak to someone or you don't. You get an invitation to go somewhere. If you refuse it, it's your loss. But fate puts you in position to meet people, to go places, to have experiences. And you, of course I'm a little old now, but I'm more open to it than I ever was. And I can now philosophize about it. Before, it was always just happening. And it's how I eventually made an art collection. Being involved with engraving and art and that, I began to go to book dealers. And again, I met a very wonderful man who, again, I'm younger, he's older man. He had a feeling and began explaining the arts of the fine book industry. And then he one day said, here's a treat for you. And he owns a great big Bible. And he said, this is the equal to the world's most famous Bible. It's the next level down. And I'm turning these pages with white gloves, and I'm looking at the woodcuts. I'm in awe. I'm holding a book from the 1400s in my hand or on a label. And so I bought a couple of things from him. Then I went to an auction, and I bought a Rembrandt one night. Rembrandt's in the 1950s had hit a low point. Prince had hit a low point. So I go to a night session with a friend of mine. And we're in the second row, and there's a man in front of me. And up comes a little etching called the Star of the Epiphany. And there was a group of children in a very dark etching. And if you look close, you could see a window and a star going by, the Star of Epiphany, and the children carry it. Well, I fell in love with that little thing, and my friend's with me. He says, you're not going to buy anything. And I said, well, let's look and see. Well, the prices started to go $25, $30 for a Rembrandt. So here comes the Star of Epiphany, and my little hand goes up, right? And the guy says, and you've got it. And I thought he's pointing to the man in front of me. He's pointing for me, and I thought I'd faint. They come down the aisle, and they handed it to me. Oh my God, I paid $50 for a Rembrandt. And my friend says, that's weird. And I said, no, it's being in the right place here, you know. And I didn't buy more that night, because you didn't have credit cards. See, if I'd had a credit card, baby, would I have loaded up? Years later, when I'm living all the way out here in Pennsylvania, I needed a new roof. And a Pennsylvanian friend of mine said, you're going to New York? I'd like to go with you, it'd be fun. So I said, yeah, I'm doing something I never wanted to do. I'm going to try to sell my Rembrandt. So I go to a well-known gallery. Now, some of these people in this business are really stupid. They think you walk in and you don't know what you've got. Oh, I'm poor, dum-dum. I don't know what I've got here. Of course I looked it up. And I get into this guy, and he's sitting behind the polished desk, and he says, oh, yeah, that's a nice little Rembrandt. And I said, look at the back, and said the Berlin print room, the Prince of Liechtenstein. There were more stamps on the back of that damn print, everyone trading and buying it. And I said, it's really valuable. He said, no, I'll give you a fast $200. And I said, that's very kind of you, but I'm taking the print, and I'll go to somebody who knows the real value, and I think you do too, but screw you. Now I go all the way uptown, and my friend says, what do you do? I said, no. I said, there's a private dealer uptown, a European, and he's got friends. I walk in, and his wife is there, and he's there, and she takes one look. I show it to her, and she says, you know you've got a very valuable Rembrandt. And I said, yes, and she says, my husband is out of the country at the moment, but if you'll sign a form and keep it with me, he'll call you tomorrow, and he'll make you an offer. He calls the next morning, and he says, I will give you $4,000 for the etching. So I go in to see him, and I said, he says, no, I'll be honest with you. After I buy it from you, I'm getting on a plane to Switzerland and selling it for $8. He says, but that's the way it goes. He says, it's really worth $8,000. I can't pay that. But I have a collector who wants, this is a beautiful little etching, and you need $4,000, right? I said, yeah, I need a roof. He says, we're both happy. So he goes off, and I get a check in the mail for $4,000. And my friend says, holy shit, why didn't you do that? You know, buy a lot of them. I said, I didn't have the money. I bought one, and now I miss it. It's out of my hands. So after that, I went to other etching, other print sales, and I got a very fine Salvador Dali. I got 3 Kurt Seligmans. You don't hear as much about him, but a very important German who lived in New York at the time. I've got 2 of the Italian De Chiricos. I've got all these things that kept falling into my interest. And now I'm smart enough. When I see them, I got that credit card, baby. And when someone says, oh, we got this funny Italian thing here. I was working at a gallery in, yeah, it was in Pennsylvania. And the woman says, we're going to be doing this great big print sale. There's a lot of things here. Do you see something you want, Larry? You know, you tell me. And I'm looking at a De Chirico. I said, that's an interesting little thing. And she says, I'm thinking of asking $80 for it. And I said, you just sold it. I didn't say it's worth 400 or 500, maybe even 4,000. I just said, that's nice, thank you. It's on my wall at home in the bedroom. So now I've got a big collection to where I'm thinking, I've talked vaguely to them. I'm good friends with the people at Lebanon Valley College. And I like that room in the chapel. If you haven't been there, it's a lovely little gallery to visit. And I said to the woman one day, I know what the gallery business is like for you people. You have to pay for transportation when you rent a show. You have to have insurance. You have to have all sorts of things. It's expensive. I said, I'd like to make you an offer. I have a very valuable collection of basically surrealist works or related, and I would love to see them in a room like this. And just call it one man's collection. Don't even put my name on it. Just say one man's collection. You insure it. I'll transport it there. I'll transport it back. You know, I'll help you hang it. So that's my ultimate goal, is to do that and let other people enjoy it. And then eventually Bill will get it someday down the line, and Bill can do with what he wants. He can give some to the college. I like the little college. I never went there, but I like it. And they own my work. They just buy 2 of my works. Anybody who buys them is a friend. And so that's the story of what I do and how I got involved in the arts. And it's never been dull since. Got another question?
Yes, sure.
Be brave, ask.
Well, as an artist, it sounds like you were influenced by a lot of things, because you were taken around to a lot of museums, a lot of
Yes.
galleries, and saw a lot of different works of different artists.
Yes.
Are there any particular that stand out in your mind as being something that particularly influenced your work?
I've looked at a great many. I go home, I think about them. I always get the catalogs. I'd say there's a couple of things that influenced me. The first Dali and the first Mata paintings I saw in slide form have remained with me ever since. And that was Mr. Wickman showing a slideshow. And the first one was a huge, I don't know Dali's title, but it was a huge human head sleeping, and it trails off into space. And it's got crutches holding the head up, a sleeping head, with little tiny people walking around. The second slide up was a great landscape with a great volcanic form with jewels and colors spewing out Now, thinking back, this was when I was at a certain age. You could make a sexual Freudian thing with that. But neither one of those slides has ever left me. But yes, I go to see people's work. I'm wide open to looking at anyone's work. Techniques interest me. Philosophically, I always go with the Surrealists, Cubists, even the Dada artists who were making protests. That's why I make a protest. Those have had a great influence. Picasso's Guernica, when it was in New York, I had to go anytime in New York to see the Guernica. I could not believe the size, the power, and then when the museum slowly acquired the crying women, the studies for it, that really freaked me out, because there was the Guernica, there were the crying women, and then a book came out. Someone had photographed him while he was working on it, and to see how he rubbed it out and changed it and scrubbed it over, and you know, like I do as an artist, or anyone did. It didn't flow off his fingertips. He felt deeply, and he expressed it until he got it right. And that, I think, sticks in my mind. He, as an image, sticks in my mind because, yeah, he batted them out, but if you turn his paintings around, unlike me who forgets to date them, he puts the date on, he did. He put the date of every day he worked on it. And sometimes the back of a Picasso canvas is covered with dates. He never stopped. He changed and changed and changed. He was never quite sure. And none of us are quite sure. I don't start out cocksure with what I'm doing. That's why people say, well, could you write me an explanation? No. I can do it with the political ones. I can't tell you why I chose what I did to do it. But yeah, some of them are obvious symbols. But when I do something that's really moving, I can't give you a reason why I did it. It hit me. Bill and I take trips once in a while. We took a trip upstate, Sullivan County. It was getting near twilight. And as we're driving along, he drives nice and slow. I looked to my right, and there was a barn set back from the road, but it wasn't barn colored. It was jet black, with an open door, with a dim light, and a white cupola, and behind it was a street lamp in the middle of a field. Didn't make sense. And then a couple of houses that looked like they should be in a street, but there were no streets. And I couldn't forget that image. So while he's driving, I'm sketching this down on a pad and writing notes. I came home, and about a week later, I started it. It's about this big. Okay, I started painting that sucker, and over, and over, and over, until I got the damn thing right. I couldn't, and someone said to me, why did it take you so long? And I said, I just don't paint about. I said, there was something about the barn. Why was it black? Why did it have a strange little light and a door open? You know, and why is there a street light in the background? I said, look at the picture as a whole. And I still have it at home. I still look at it on the wall, and I still wonder why the damn street light and those red houses in the background. And I enjoy that. Last night I watched a TV show by accident, Magicians. Penn and Teller had magicians on. And I thought, how wonderful. I never want to know how they do the trick. And then the one person who said, I don't want to know how the man disappears in the box. It's wonderful. He disappears and he comes walking down the aisle. I don't want to know that that's a trick. And I have never, from childhood I loved, there was a man named Cardini. He used to come out in early television. He would be an older man dressed in beautiful white tie and tails, the top hat, and he'd produce a deck of cards and another and another. and he'd project them out of his hat, from behind his head, up his sleeve. And the floor would be covered, and you'd think, how could anyone keep pulling out of nowhere full decks of cards? And that was it. Mr. Cardini, that's all he worked with, was cards. I still remember him. I still like him. I still do pictures with picture cards on occasion. So I am influenced by people. Sometimes I'm influenced by artists who mean something to me, but they don't influence my work particularly. Late one night after a movie, I bought a book on Viard. And Viard is an offbeat, one of the impressionist types from France. And I just looked at the prints and I said, this is fascinating. And I read a little bit in the beginning of the book. He was a man who lived all of his life with his sisters in an apartment in Paris, wasn't married, and looked out the window and painted these scenes. And he had such a feel for paint. And I was told that when he went to dinner parties, he would have a little pad down here, and he'd be making little sketches so that he gets at the table. And I had to read about him. Then I had to read the whole book. I read what a loner he was, how beautiful his little canvases were. And then I walked in a New York gallery on 79th Street. I can remember the gallery. And there was one for sale. It was two people at a breakfast table, and he could create sunlight. I mean, we all work with cadmium yellow and whites and things. This picture looked lit by sunlight, and he had played with the paint so carefully. And they were eating bread, and there was I had to go over to the man minding the gallery, and I said, how much is the Viard? And he says, oh, it's not a bad price, 10,000. And I thought, not maybe in your gallery. I said, well, I'm going to go home and think about it. Well, I wasn't lying. I went home and I thought about it, and I still remember the painting, but I didn't have $10,000 to buy it. Now it'd be worth a hell of a lot more. But the man touched.
This is the second interview with Larry. And I just want to make sure again that I have your permission to record the interview today.
Yes, you do.
Great, thank you. So the last interview that we had, we kind of left off that you were still in New York. I want to stay in New York just a little bit longer to talk about more of your LGBT life, your gay life in New York, and sort of when, like what year maybe approximately that you started going out more, getting into the LGBT bar scene, or whatever things that you were doing at that time.
Okay. I would say that I became more active after high school, and I began to work. I would say maybe 2 or 3 years after. I had little part-time jobs. I worked for R.H. Macy in the art department, selling art supplies. I worked for an advertising agency for a few weeks. Then I worked for an art service, which is a mini advertising agency, believe it or not, that do a lot of the work for the bigger companies. And that was very interesting. I was mostly getting information for the artists who were working there. In those days, you had places in New York who rented pictures to you. They took them out of magazines, books, whatever, and they were your reference. So I'd run down and say, what have you got on the Arctic? You know, the Arctic, we're doing a thing on the North Star, blah, blah, blah. And they would supply you with pictures to take back in an envelope. And so I was doing that, and I learned a lot about that. Also, the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue had a service like that that was very popular. I don't think any of that exists at the moment. I think that's all gone with the computers and everything. But it made life interesting. But gay life, no, at that point was way in the background of my mind. It was only on the edges. Because working there, I'd rush home for dinner, you know, and it was not, you didn't feel like going out when you were out in the suburbs, going back to the city.
Were you still living at home at that point?
Oh
or-
yeah, I was still living at home.
Yeah.
Well, my mother was ill. She had cerebral strokes. My father was working a full-time job. He was the production manager for the ADT company that makes all the production devices, and had a very important position, but was very busy. So I tried to stay around the house as much as possible. There are no other family members. There were none on my father's side because they were all in Germany, whoever they may have been. And on my mother's side, there was only an aunt who was rather a little religious fanatic. She was not something that we particularly dealt with. And she lives in Jersey anyway. So it was mostly me. It was a very small family group, the three of us. And I began to be aware of the gay life. Even when I worked at Macy's, there were other gay employees, believe it or not. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do about all that. I really wasn't. I was still growing into manhood, if you want. And so after that, I really became very interested in wanting to be involved in theater. And so my father worked with a lot of men who would work part-time for ADT and then would go off into other work. Well, one of those was a scenic designer, or worked in that capacity, and told my father about the United Scenic Workers of America, and that you had to take an examination for it, and they don't let anybody in particularly. I learned that was a euphemism. So, all right, he said, why don't you sign up for that? I'll pay the entrance fee, which was like $75. I signed up, and I turned out to be the youngest member of the group that was going to take the exam. Everybody was in their 20s or 30s, and I'm the happy-go-lucky teenager, right? Which worked in my favor, because it's almost a 12-hour test. You have a lunch break and so on. And you meet in a room on 42nd Street. And when I didn't know the answer to a question, one of the other guys would go, hey, you know. And it was very nice of them to help me, because I was like the kid brother, right? So I was doing that, and there was a man who claimed to have been a designer, who was the monitor of the meeting, or the examination. And I remember my encounter with him was, one of the examples was pick a play of your choosing that you've seen or you know about, and draw a stage set for one of the acts. And everyone going to town, and I chose Truman Capote, The Grass Harp. That was big at the time. So I'm busy drawing this thing of a great big tree with the people up in the tree and the whole thing. I was very proud of myself. And this guy comes walking down the aisle looking at it, and he says, oh, that's extraordinary. Do you know how much that would cost to build? I said, I have the foggiest notion. And so I said, besides, you didn't say we had to take costs into consideration. You just said, make a drawing of it, say, this is mine. Grass Harp, Truman Capote, the whole thing. Well, he went away. The test ended. And about, 3 weeks later, we get a thing in the mail. You passed, you got an 85. Okay, and that was a little over the passing mark of 70-something. So my father said, this is wonderful. Of course, he was eventually a union person. So and it said, now you can go around to all the theaters in New York, and apply for an apprentice job. So I get all dressed up, and one of the first ones on my list was the Metropolitan Opera. And since I liked the opera, it was on 42nd Street. I go with my little pass and my little approval, and I'm dressed like this, okay? Mistake of all time. But I'm dressed like this. And I go in the back door of the Met, and I'm suddenly on stage. And people are rustling scenery around, and I'm thinking, you know, I got to the middle of the stage, and I looked out at that sea of seats, and I said, Caruso stood here, and Geely, and all these incredible people, and here you are, and you can't sing a note. You know? So I finally got to an elevator. They tell me to go up in the flies. That was about 5 stories up. And I come out of the flies, and here's the top of the scenery that eventually drops down. And there's a guy with a bucket and a giant brush, spattered overalls, and he's slopping the paint on. And he says, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm from the labor union, and they want to know if you need an apprentice. And he says, apprentice? No, I don't need. And he said, why are you dressed like that? Look at how I'm dressed. You work with buckets of casein paint and big brushes, and now I'm looking crestfallen. And I said, well, usually when you go for a job, you dress up. So he says, not here, you dress down. So, and he was a very nice guy, Mr. Novak. And so he says, you really want to work in this business? And I said, well, I've been told this, you know, the salaries are phenomenal. I said, my father works for whatever amount, but one of his associates works for you people on occasion and gets $400 a week, which at that time was stupendous. And I said, I wouldn't mind $400 a week either. Apprentices don't get $400. So I said, okay, you don't have an opening. He says, no. And he says, I could tell you other things, but I won't. You'll find out as you go around. And he says, but you look like you should be in advertising. I mean, you got the part, you got a portfolio of drawings, and this is wonderful. And he said, my son's in advertising. You'd like advertising. And he kept pushing that at me. And I said, well, I'll take your advice. But it was great being in the Met and great meeting you. And I went down out. And I had another one on the list, and I go to another one. And it's the same routine. Oh, gee, you're a nice guy, and we'd love to hire you, but when we are the only artist here, we can't hire an apprentice. That's a union rule. Now I'm beginning to think, then why does the union accept my money if I can't get a job? So by the third one, I was getting really fed up. And that's where I met my first, shall we say, blooming queen of all time. Backstage, I get to this place, and he comes to look at me and says, oh, a live one. And I said, now I'm scared silly, right? Because I've been warned. So I said, no, not a live one, I'm trying to be an apprentice. He says, oh, you could be an apprentice for me. And I said, no, I meant for the theater. Again, no, we can't hire one unless there's 2 or more artists working. So I thought, well, that's a clever thing. They took all of our money who passed, but we can't get a job. So I finally meet one of the fellows on the street, and I said, how are you doing? And he says, I can't get anything. So I went on another day doing this. I finally meet a man who's designing a set, and he's actually sitting on stage with a drafting table, and he was doing the most beautiful drawing of a southern plantation. And I'm drooling over this. And he was kind and nice, and he said, yeah, it was a very important play, and if my mind was working, I could tell you who the actress was going to be, but it was a big, big name. And he said, I can't hire you. Your portfolio is interesting. You look like you're very intelligent, But again, those union rules, I can't do it. But this is what I do. And he's explaining he had architecture courses, blah, blah, blah. And I leave, and I thought, well, at least he looked at my work. He liked it, so I go home and I tell my father this, and he said, this doesn't sound good. Try one more day. I tried another day, nothing happened. He said, we're going to a union meeting. I'm calling for the right to be present at a union meeting. So now we go to the union. And here's these apprentice types or artists sitting around, and the union boss types, right out of a movie. I mean, these were right out of a movie. And my father goes in with me, and he says, this is my son, he passed your test. He's been walking around Manhattan every day, enjoying seeing backstage, but you have little funny rules here. You're not hiring any apprentices. And so some of the young people sitting there, the actors are saying, I told you. You know, they're knocking the table. So I was asked to leave the room. Now I can hear them arguing inside. The young people are criticizing the union bosses, saying this is why ticket prices are going up. We're turning young people away. Here's a young man wants to work with us. That'll bring other young people in. You people are keeping them out with your rules. And so they said, you've got to stop this business of only letting family members get a job. So if daddy worked, you work. You don't have a daddy, you don't work. Well, it went on, and finally I hear my father saying, I want the money back. I'm not leaving till I hear you get that $75 back. You people are doing something that I consider crooked. And now I'm sitting out there, oh God, I'm embarrassed. Daddy's yelling at people who never yelled at home, but yelled with them. So out he came with the $75 and says, you're no longer an apprentice for this group. Forget it. So I went, oh, okay. I'm not. So he says, try getting it in art school. Well, I told you last time, the GIs were back. GIs had preference, but the Art Students League didn't. So I got in there, one afternoon class. So every day I'd dress up and have a big portfolio. I'd get out of the subway. I'd walk the whole length of 57th Street to the Art Students League. And it got to be such a routine that years later I learned that someone who worked on 57th Street in an office would know it's 4 o'clock when the strange young man in the brown outfit with the big portfolio went by. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed being finally in a class with people older than myself that could draw. I'm learning to draw, everything is fine. So my father says, well, you need more than this. So then we heard about the Brooklyn Museum. And he said, I'll meet you at West 4th Street on the subway when I'm out of work. You come, we both go to Brooklyn, we both go to the Brooklyn Museum. So we went there, and sure enough, they said, we'd be glad to have your son as a student. What classes do you want? And I go, oh my God, I got a choice. So I chose a drawing class with an artist I never heard of. And there was a painting class with Charles Side, who was a pretty good painter at the time, and I knew him. And then Arnold Bank, and that was a magic name that I couldn't get in at the other school. But Arnold Bank was the leading calligrapher in New York. He was legendary, and he was now going to teach also in Brooklyn. Wham, I got into his class, and then they said there's a class in etching. Fantastic. Garbo Petty, well-known. So I had this roster of classes I went to, and every day, and I met the fellow that I eventually lived with. He was straight, Irish Catholic, square, and he lived in Forest Hills. So I'd go from my house on the subway, he'd be on the platform at Forest Hills. We'd both then do the whole trip to Brooklyn, which was changing, it was incredible. But the museum was wonderful. It had one of the world's greatest print departments under a woman named Una Johnson. It had the museum itself. It had all these American Indian things. It had everything, and I thought, hey, this is pretty good. You don't have to go outside for reference material. It's right here. It's fine. Everyone was friendly. And Arnold Bank was the walking encyclopedia. You were studying calligraphy, and I learned all the names of the types and of the Italian hand and all this. But at the same time, being Jewish and a scholar, he threw all world history at you. So I was learning about the Romans, the Greeks, the things, and that. All the while we're doing lettering. And I worshipped him. He was fantastic. He had a medical condition where his eyes were sort of popped. I can't remember what they called that, but it was bald-headed and popped eyes, you know. And he'd come at you looking very intense. And he was wonderful. I mean, that was an image I loved. So between what I was learning from him and the etcher and the drawing and the painting, I had a full schedule. And I was really getting into it. I mean, I was doing etchings, I was doing everything. Then finally another artist came to the school, Bernard Brussel-Smith. And he was teaching wood engraving. And I thought, this is for Larry. And I joined his class. And he was a guy with a beard and mustache, you know, and again, an outgoing Jewish gentleman. It was wonderful. Besides, I didn't know he was Jewish. That's a funny story. But he was very unorthodox. So for years I worked with him and I thought he was not Jewish. And then his associate said, "You just wished him happy Easter." And I said, "Yeah, why not?" And he says, "He's Jewish." All these years I've been with him and he's Jewish? I didn't know that. Bernie didn't mind. Well, anyway, I began to work with him, and he watched me doing illustrational problems. And then one day he came up to me and he said, "How would you like a job?" And I said, "I'd love a job. My family would love if I had a job." So he says, "How would you like to work for me in my studio? I have one man who represents me. I work alone. I need an apprentice who can work the printing press. I'll teach you how. My current student is going to Israel to work on a kibbutz." That was big at that time. You go there and, you know. So I said, "I love that." And he says, "And then you can keep on with this class because I'll be driving in to hold the class. You go from work with me in the car and we drive in, we have dinner on the way in." So that was my routine. So now I'm working on 43rd Street, just off 2nd Avenue or 3rd Avenue in New York in a studio. Man, that was great for me, right? So now I'm learning how to use the printing press. I'm learning how to engrave. I'm doing all this stuff. I'm going to the library. I'm doing all this. Eventually, I even went to see clients. I got to be pretty good at this stuff. And I got to watch Brussel-Smith working and with the cigar and working, you know. And the combination was deadly. But anyway, that was my beginning of a professional life and away from home.
What kind of time frame was that? Do you recall what years that was?
How old was I?
Well, yeah, or what years? Was it 1940s
I knew you'd do this.
50s or 60s?
All right, it must have been 45, 46, somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
The Korean War was going on.
Okay, probably early 50s.
50s, okay.
Yeah.
And I remember the day I received the draft notice. And I said to Bernie, I can't be here today, I got to a draft notice. And I said, "But don't worry." He says, "Why shouldn't I worry? You finally got a guy who can wood engrave, you can use a press, and you're going to go in the Army." I said, "No, Larry's not going in the Army, believe me." So I get down to the draft board, I go through this examination thing, and I tried to convince the psychiatrist I was gay. I thought that was my out.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to the psychiatrist, "I'm gay." He says, "You're the 50th one who told me you're gay." "You're not gay. You're making that up." And I said, "No, I'll swear on the Bible, I'm gay." He said, no, you're not. No, I don't believe you. And besides, he said, don't worry. And I didn't know what that meant. So I go on to the next doctor, and this doctor looks at the list, and he looks at me, and he says, do you really want to be in the Army? And I said, no, I don't want to be in the Army. I don't want to kill people. I don't even know the Koreans. I don't want to kill people. And he said, you're worried though, right? And I said, yeah. And he says, you're not going to get in the Army. I said, but look, it says 90%. He says, that's 90% disability. They don't want you. You've got a funny looking back. Well, by then I was younger and I didn't know how bad the back was. So I said, oh, you're right. You know, good actor, I did the whole bit. And so finally I get past him, and I got a 90% disability. You get down to a big room, and here sits all these doctors from the local hospital with the bloody gowns. They do that to scare you, you know. They've just come from operating. And I'm standing in front of one, and there's a room full of men, and this one says to me, this can't be. 90%, no way. You look fine. Take your clothes off. Now, I'd been marching around without clothes before. Now I'm dressed, and I see everyone else is dressed. I'm going to be the only one in the room nude. So I thought, if I run show business, this might be a big moment, but I'm not. So I said, okay, I took off the clothes. Now other doctors crowd around, and they say, you got a funny looking spine. The x-ray is really, you know, and he says, you mean he really is 4F? And the guy says, well, look at this thing. He's got a curve. And he says, do you have pain? And I said, oh, do I have pain? I work at a desk all the time. I can't walk too far, and I have to take elevators and stuff. And so they said, oh, I suppose we're going to have to do it. Reject! Gave me a dime and the rejection slip. I went down that stairs so fast, I almost killed the naval officer coming up the stairs. And I got back to Bernie, my dime was for the subway. And he says, well, I said, a reject. I got a terrible spine, hooray! So I went working with him. And that was the beginning of New York life. I was beginning to wean myself away from the house, as it were, and even from my friend, because he was working at another job. And I was really beginning to feel myself as a man. I now had a craft I could do, and I did it very well, and I enjoyed it. And I got to visit advertising agencies. And in one case, someone said, they always were stealing people from one another. Yeah. Why don't you bring your portfolio over to us? It was a big agency that did the Whalen Drug Company. Whalen was a big, huge outfit. So I thought, oh, I'm not being disloyal to Bernie. I'm still working. I'll bring my portfolio over. So I did. And this young art director says, you're just what we're looking for. You could be working in an agency like this. And I said, make me an offer. So he says, well, leave your portfolio. I've got to show it to the head man. I come back the next day and he says, I'm sorry. I love your portfolio. Other art directors do. The head man won't hire you. And I said, why not? He says, you didn't graduate from Pratt. And I said, what difference does it make? I can do this. I'm working for Brussels. No, he only hires Pratt people. And I said, that's prejudice. He said, I'm sorry. It was nice meeting you. Lots of luck. So I go back with Brussels. I didn't tell him any of that adventure. And we were doing very well together. And I was getting to do, like the one piece I brought you, the Barnes Printing Company. That I did. Then he had a trade magazine for the gift and art industry. And he let me do the layouts and the covers. So I designed all the covers and did the artwork. I did all the layouts inside with the photographs and the story pages. So I was getting a hell of an education right on the spot. At which point he was getting edgy and maybe wanting to retire to the country where he could work from home and not. And I could see where the trail was going. So he said to me one day, come up to my house for dinner. Westchester, fantastic house, you know, the whole bit. A maid, you know, a cook. I have a lovely dinner. And he's saying, how do you like this place? And I said, it's nice, it's nice. You got a big garden in the back with trees and everything. And he said, my wife teaches at a big high school in New York. I'll introduce you. We have a son. I go back to work the next day, and I'm thinking, oh, there's something cooking. So he says, look, it's near Christmas. I can't take my son to a department store. I'm letting you take my precious son. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm getting in deeper. So now I take the kid in a cab and I do the whole bit, you know, and I bring him back safe and sound. And Brussels Smith says, how would you like to move in with me? You could live at my house. And I thought, right, 24 hours a day, I would have to put up with Mr. Brussels Smith. And the gardening, because he knew I liked gardening. And I thought, no way, Jose, no way. In the meantime, I was making myself a portfolio, and my friend who was now working for another company, I said, why don't we try freelancing? And that's how that started. Well, once I was off on my own, if I went out with the portfolio, Joe would stay home with my mother. If he went out, I'd stay home. So we had two of us going out with the same portfolio, and we got jobs. And we got some good ones. And we did our own mailing pieces, of which I have one or two in there. And we found that when we were sending them out, because they were hand printed, older art directors were in love. They were collecting our pieces and giving us little jobs to do. Then finally we get the Seagram's whiskey job. And my friend says, do you really think we can handle a big illustration for Seagram's whiskey? And I said, as Brussels Smith, Arnold Banks said, take the job and find out how to do it after you get it. So we both struggled with that big wood engraving. I taught my friend to engrave exactly as I did. So when I got tired, he could sit down and pick up the tool and continue the lines. And that was clever on my part and his. And so we engraved that one. And they loved it. They loved it. They asked what the role was in the foreground. Someone said it was a Kanesh or something like a Jewish thing. And I said, it's anything you want it to be. It's a role. It's the holiday season. And Jewish people eat and drink Seagrams. So you're not going to screw me over. So anyway, we did that. And we got a few jobs that were very good. We got a huge one for, thinking of Harrisburg, the Civil War. There was a very well-known author who wrote books on the Civil War, whose name is also escaping me. But anyway, he did things for a magazine that was very high class, and he had done and wanted bands at the top, the Civil War. And so the editor called us and said, you're a natural. So we meet this incredible author. He's thrilled to know we're going to do it. I show him samples. We go home. And then like so many, I've got to watch my language here, so many art directors who are so inconsiderate about time, they wanted everything done with speed. Mm-hmm. So I said to Joe, we can't do this. We can't do a wood engraving this time. We're going to fake it. We're going to do a pen and ink. And I said, it's such a short period, we'll have to work overnight. So we get a little bottle of caffeine pills. I'd heard about them. and we'd take the caffeine pills. We were starry-eyed, and we did it. We did everything except one little tailpiece. And the next day, my eyes moved shut, you know. I drive a car in, find a parking spot on Park Avenue, go to the agency and show it. The author comes in, magnificent. Oh, this is what, well, there's one little tailpiece. And I said, no little tailpiece. We can't do another one. I'm going to die. So the guy said, well, you did such a superb job. And I said, just pass, just pass. I can't do that, so get somebody else to do a little tailpiece. So I got home to Joe and I said, we pulled it off. They didn't know whether it was an engraving or a pen and ink drawing. Let it be. So this is how we got involved. And we did work for agencies. We worked for all sorts of people. We would take any job that came along if it was interesting. We did, because Joe had an in with this publishing company that did crossword puzzles, endless crossword puzzles, yachting covers and everything. We knew the editor. So she gave us an assignment. We want some clever new crossword covers. So we did those, $50 a shot. We knocked those things out. So that gives her. At which point, I was beginning to go out on my own. And that's when I was beginning to venture into the gay world. I would go back. Joe could stay home with my mother. I would go into the city, and I discovered Third Avenue, and I discovered all these wonderful bars, well, hundreds of bars, gay, you know, very elaborate ones, not so elaborate. And I went in one or two. How to get my nerve up to do that. And I found out it was very pleasant. People were very friendly. I'm not a drinker, so I'd nurse a drink all night, you know. And I had a good time.
Do you remember the names of any of the bars that you went to then?
Oh. It'll come back to me. I can't remember.
okay.
I remember there was one on 53rd and 3rd. That's now a big office building, but it was there. There was some right down the block, some 2 blocks over. I don't even remember the names, but I just knew the routine.
Yeah.
And 3rd Avenue was filled with gay people. You couldn't walk without bumping into a third one, so I learned about that. I spoke to some. I went home with one night for pay. I paid him, and he lived down the village. I was scared silly. We were getting in a cab, and I'm going off with a strange gentleman to a strange apartment. It was okay, it was fun. I liked him, nice guy. And we had a good time. I paid him his $10 or whatever it was. I got back in a cab and came back uptown. And I was doing this, but never telling Joe this, because I didn't want him to be scared silly about this stuff. And particularly, he was very attractive, and gay people made a play for him, and he couldn't stand that. So I thought, well, rather than get him upset, I'm not going to tell him he's living with a gay person, right? And I had my little gay magazines. There was little ones. Physique Pictorial was a big one, and others. And I was buying those and reading about all this. And that was my venture into it.
Was this
Then I
about
found-
in the late 50s? Or
It's the 50s,
late
yeah.
50s, yeah.
And then one night, I'm coming home from Manhattan, and I get out at the end of the subway, I get on the bus, I'm riding out to where I live, and there's very few passengers, but there's a nice-looking young man. And now I'm getting the feeling for recognizing people. And I thought, he's coming out my way, and he's gay. So when he was getting off, I got off the bus. Now I'm about 10 blocks from where I really live. So as he walked very slow, I walked up next to him, and of course he was gay. So he says, I don't have a place to go. And I said, neither do I. So we fooled around in someone's garden. And then I walked home from there. So I learned about gay life. And it was all really very, very innocent in a way. And, but I enjoyed it. and I didn't know where it was going to lead. But I was very careful. I've heard all the things about disease and all of this good stuff, you know, and so I'm being very careful. Then one of my friends living out there was a ballet dancer, and I told you about him. So outside of our one adventure in the back of Daddy's car, I really didn't do much with him. But I now was a visitor to New York all the time, and the theater, and so on. And finally, where we were living, that's when the rioting started all over the country, the black and white issue. And we were at the end of a bus line, which meant a lot of blacks were moving up our way, which was white territory. This was black. And now they were coming up, but coming up to rob. Women couldn't go to a store without being robbed. Houses were broken into. Joe didn't go out on the lawn without a hunting knife on his belt because he was afraid something would happen. So I said, we can't live this way. So I drew a circle on the map and said, we got to move. Never did like my family's house anyway. And I said, by now it's worth money. But if this continues, the prices are going to go down. So he says, I'm game wherever you want to go. So I drew the circle, and I couldn't find anything in that circle. And I included part of Jersey that I could afford to buy. And I wanted a house. I didn't want an apartment. So we had moved another artist to Pennsylvania. He's dead now, but he was big wheel when he got here. He looked like Oscar Wilde and acted like Oscar Wilde. Yeah, Italy.
Yeah.
You've heard of him, I'm sure.
I met him.
Infinitely. Oh, you met him. Oh,
yes.
but then you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So we moved him down here into a terrible neighborhood, but he didn't know he was going in that. And so I said, why don't we visit Lee? Go down there. Neither one of us know anything about Pennsylvania except the little Amish stories you hear and see, you know. Let's go down there and explore it. So we got on a bus, and with the car, we came down an old Plymouth, and we hit it when this was depressed. The Harrisburg.
Do you remember what year it was that you came?
50, before the flood.
72.
72
So
or
71,
yeah, something like
maybe
in
70
there.
or 71, yeah.
And it looked depressed, but there were things for sale all over. The Army had given up the air base, so all of those families moved out. It was a depressed area, and I said to my friend, I said, this is unreal. Everywhere I look, there are houses for sale. Now, I'm being smart-ass. I want a loft like New York. There's no lofts. There was one on State Street, but it's long gone. So anyway, Hitler puts us up for a weekend or so, and I meet other people locally. And finally, I meet a realtor. And I said, I'm looking for something different. Now, he's used to houses. And I'm saying, have you got a disused church? Have you got a loft? Have you got anything? Well, surprisingly, friends of ours in New York who's an artist said, no, Larry, there's a firehouse for sale down there. I said, how do you know? He says, I was going to buy it at one point and move myself from New York to there. A big German guy named Achtung. And so I said, Herb, you're amazing. He says, I know that, but there's a problem. So I come back down, and now I know where to ask. So I said to a realtor, I hear you got a firehouse for sale. I said, do you want a firehouse? And I said, well, yeah, possibly. He said, let me show you 2nd Street. And they showed me 2nd Street, and I'm looking at mansions, and they're all in my price range. I've now got that first time in my life money from the house I'm selling. They're offering me houses for less, and they're bigger, and they're glamorous. And then I see the green line on either side of the river. And the realtor tells me that's a floodplain. So I said, no, 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 no. We do not buy in floodplains. I know all about that stuff, you know. So he says, well, the little firehouse is uphill. I said, good, drive me there. So he drove Joe and I up, and as we're going up, I knew the guy didn't, I have a New York accent at that time, probably more pronounced. And I knew this was annoying him. So I said, well, gee, this is interesting. We're going uphill. If there ever were a flood, it means the whole of Harrisburg would be gone, and maybe New York would be flooded. And if New York was flooded, there wouldn't be any reason to live. We wouldn't have to worry about how. And he got deep red. And he drives me into Oberlin, and it was a day when the kids roll at school. It's quiet, there's no children, no cars, and there sits the little firehouse. And I immediately fall in love with it. It's got the roll-up doors and all that crap. And I get inside and I'm noticing solid stone foundation, front wall of the building, 2 feet thick concrete, brick building, double layers. And I said, this isn't bad. It needs a lot of work, but it's not bad. So I said, this is interesting. And he quotes a price. And I thought I heard wrong. It was such a cheap price. But now I've got another local with me, a friend of Hidley's named Abe Dewhurst, a real Dutchman. And he's, don't take the price, don't take the price. You got to bargain. This is bargain territory. And I said, Abe, he's offered it at such a cheap price. I go back and I tell my dad, and I tell him, and he says, they couldn't sell you a brick and stone building for that price. And I said, Joe, it's fantasy land down there. You can't believe it. So I've been now looking with the realtor, too many adventures to tell you, but I met my first prejudice in Mechanicsburg. There was a house on Mechanicsburg, Main Street, he showed me. Glorious. It had a law. It had they put a skylight in and you got a loft. Brilliant. The owner lived right across the street, a woman. I go to the realtor and I said, this is before the firehouse. And I said, I'd like to buy the house. I've just seen the house across the street. And he says, oh, that's great. Well, I'll talk to the owner, she's across the street, and you can arrange a bank loan. And I said, no, no, Mr. Hotshot here, I'll write a check. He said, for the house? And he could see his commission right there on the desk. And I said, yeah, I'll write a check for the whole thing. I don't want any of these things, you know. He goes across the street, comes back, and he's crestfallen. And he says, she won't sell to you. I said, I just offered you full price. I'm willing to buy the house as it is. I'm not asking her to do anything. Why won't she sell it to me? He says, you're not going to believe this, but you're a New Yorker. And I said, what difference is, look, I'm white, you know, a white New Yorker, German, you know. And he says, no, no, you don't understand. If you buy the house, you're going to turn it into an antique shop. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm an artist. I don't want to own an antique shop. I don't know what I'm going to be doing, but I'm not doing that. And he said, she won't sell. I said, well, I'll be damned if I'll raise the price. It's the wrong end. It should be the other way around. I said, tell her to go shove it someplace. Then I finally get to this firehouse thing. And I get the people on the phone, and Abe is, don't do it. So I said, yeah, you made a nice offer, but it's a little high. I think I'll have it. And the guy says, sit by your phone. I'll be back to you in about 10 minutes. 10 minutes later, phone rings, we accept. And I look at Abe, and he says, I told you. So now I'm stealing the property, right? And I said, who owns this? So he said, the realtor says, 2 men run it as a silkscreen factory for the Hershey Corporation, for the teams. Now that's what he knew. He didn't know there was a third partner who had dropped dead. That left a widow and children, all of which are in on this deal. Now, if I tell you the price, you aren't going to believe me. I bought the whole property for $4,000. Now, you've got 2 men, a woman, and 2 children. And I've got a nice lawyer on Front Street. And I tell him I want to buy this. I have to go back to New York. Would you handle it? So he's handling it, and I get a call. Mr. Von Barann, I hate to tell you, but there's a woman involved now and children. We have to take out a bond on the woman and a separate one on each child and the whole thing. Do you know how complicated this is getting? And I said, that's what I pay you the big bucks for. I don't know from these things. You do it. So finally, my 3rd visit down, I'm there. There's the 2 men. There's the fat lady with the children. And we're all signing papers, and I'm writing checks. And when they were all through, he says, do not ever come back to me again with buying a firehouse. I will throw you out the door. So I've never seen the lawyer since. So now I had a firehouse, and we moved ourselves up. And I got here, and it was raining and snowing, and we moved in with our possessions, and we did our own moving, which was dumb, but we moved in. And then after I got here a little bit, to condense this story, Joe eventually gets married. He wasn't going to leave. He's going to help me work the house. He's going to be this. No, we met a curator from the museum, a girl who looked exactly like Elizabeth Taylor. I mean, he wasn't fooling with crap. And I didn't know she went out with the 2 of us, threesomes. And I'm busy, doing stuff, and I got a job. I'm now teaching at Hack. And she had made up her mind, I found out later, that she was going to marry one of the other women. You wonder why I have a funny feeling about some women? She had made up her mind, not the men. So anyway, Joe falls desperately in love. And she gets ill and has to go to a hospital in Cleveland. I supplied the funds for him to go, the whole thing. And he announces they're getting married. And she came from a prominent military family. So they were going to marry at the army post in the chapel. And I said, good for you, I'm thrilled. And so I'm now seething inside, and I'm dying to tell something to Joe and scream at him, but it's not his fault. I mean, it's love and all thing. And we've had a lot of time together, and we've been good partners. So finally, I get the announcement, they're going to do that, and I'm to be the best man. Now, I felt that was rubbing it in. But Joe, in innocence, didn't know. Mm-hmm. Okay? So now I'm over in the chapel, and it's just before the wedding. And this little demon in my mind wouldn't let go. So I said, before you go in to say the vows with her, I have something to tell you. You have been living with a gay man all these years. And his jaw dropped. And he says, you're making this. I said, no, I'm gay as can possibly be. And I have no desire for your body. I never did. Women do, I don't. But I just wanted you to know, I won't be alone. There's a flock of us in Harrisburg. Well, he goes in and went through with the marriage. We go to a restaurant. The priest comes with us, and I'm the best man making toasts and that. And he's now whispered this to Shirley, who's sitting looking at me like she's traumatized. And I'm enjoying every moment of it. So they go off on a honeymoon. And now I'm living alone, right? But I've now got a job. Hidley introduced me to his school teacher, one of the staff at Hack. Edie Sokolow, did you ever meet her? You know Edie? Oh, okay. Well, Edie meets me and she's watching me during dinner and she says, "You need employment?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "How would you like to teach at college level?" I said, "Yeah, Edie, that would be fun." And she says, "We have this art program at Hack that's not very big. As a matter of fact, it's 2 people." And I said, "Oh, that's not very big." And she said, "Well, we've got things on the book that you would be ideal for." She said, "I'll tell you what, I'll introduce you to the head of the department. What does he turn out to be? An ex-Jesuit priest." I don't make that up either, but that would be good if you were doing a sitcom. So I meet this guy, and he's really nice. He's a really nice guy. And he said, "And where did you study to be a teacher?" And I said, "I didn't study to be a teacher." "Edie tells me you've got something called art and industry." He says, "Yes." And I said, "Commercial artist. I can teach." "Oh." And I said, "I'm a fine artist, can paint, draw, wood engrave, etch, you name it, Larry can do it." And he says, "Oh, you might be what we're looking for." And I says, "I know damn well I'm what you're looking for." Now, I know nothing about signing contracts. I know nothing about Hack's reputation. I didn't know how bad it was, okay? So he names a sum of money bigger than I'd ever earned before. And I said, "I'm your man." And I don't read all the fine print. And I'm signing this thing. And he says, "Welcome on board. And your first job will be a life class." So I've got a life class. And I got these clothes models, you know. And Edie said, "You can't have nudes." And I said, "Well, how do you teach a life class in anatomy if the person can't take their shirt off, their pants off, or whatever?" And she said, "Well, then again, you're new. Maybe you could do something." So I said, "Yeah, I can do something. I'm going to complain. I won't teach the class unless you give me a nude model." Well, obviously, the word went out. It's a New Yorker. He's hot. You know, give him what he wants. So they come back and they said, "Yeah, you can have your nude models, male or female, but you have to supply them. We'll pay them $10 an hour, but you get the names. We don't ask people to take their clothes off." I said, "Fine." And so the head of the department says, "Where are you getting nude bodies from?" And I said, "It's simple. I wrote a note to the theater department. And I said, 'Male and female actors, would you like some extra money? $10 an hour. Take your clothes off and pose for Von Barann's drawing class.'" I got models who were willing to undress with no trouble at all. So I get to know, and Edie said, "Well, how did you do that?" And I said, "Don't ask, just enjoy it. Now you can have a nude model. Anybody else can have it." So I'm teaching the drawing class, and they finally said, "Well, we'd like to do this art and industry thing. Could you write up a proposal for an advertising class?" I said, "Right, I'll write it up." So I write it up, and they said, "Congratulations, you can now teach an advertising course." So I said, "Well, I want this room, I want this, I want this stuff." You know, I run it my way. And he said, "Well, you will write notes." And I said, "No, I do not write notes. I don't even write a teaching plan." Oh, and his face is falling. And I said, "I'm going to run it like an advertising agency. I'm the head art director. You are the bullpen. I throw ideas out. You do it, or you get fired. Okay? Or you don't pass the class." It worked. Everyone loved it. And anyway, that was the way I began that. Then I began to teach more than one drawing class, and I taught a two-dimensional class. Before you know it, my days were filled, and I'm doing this stuff. Then in the meantime, Italy introduces me to Maya Shark and the Doshi. Well, I get involved with Maya and the Doshi and that. And I begin to exhibit there. And I'm enthralled by Maya, who's saying, I'm the daughter of a samurai. We kill people if they stand in our way. And I thought, this is a woman I can dig. This is really great. And I found there was a feud between her, Carrie, and the William Riss Gallery. William Riss had a rule, if you showed at the Doshi, you couldn't show at the William Riss. So Maya says, you show at William Riss, you don't show at me. And if they stopped up at the other. So I thought, I'm in the middle of an insane war between the women. So I said, fine, do whatever you want. But Maya was from Philadelphia, so she was getting exciting artists. And I thought, now I'm really involved. So I'm barely able to work on the house. So I get a friend of mine who worked and did sets for Allenbury. And he was a jack of all trades. And I said, I tell you what, I can't pay you a lot, but while I'm at school, could you take the plaster off the walls? Could you do other things for me? You know? And eventually I'll try to get you a job there, which I did. So now I'm manipulating all this crap, and I'm thinking, hell, this is not dull being in this town. And then I meet people like the mayor, and I'm meeting other valuable people, the goddesses of the town, Lois Grass. I've thought, wow, money lady, treated with, you know, she could be a bitch. Give her a glass of whiskey, honey, and oh, you may have to edit this. I forgot it was on camera. So anyway, I met all these people, and they got me involved, because then I met the people at WITF, Mike Greenwald and those, and so when they had an auction, I was involved with that, and I became an auctioneer. And then I became an advisor on their panel, and then I became whatever you want. Finally, the mayor decides he's going to have a conference of mayors from around the country. And since I had put on a huge show for WITF's new building, the mayor said, how about you do City Hall? Whoopee! So I did City Hall. I filled it with artwork and sculpture and everything, and people are photographing it, and the mayor sends me notes, and I got one letter there, I got another fun thing, the mayor. So the mayor loved me. And I was now beginning to do all these cultural things and the activity around here. And I was enjoying it. I was getting myself in the paper. I was getting things. I got in the middle of arguments and fights. I got that in the paper. And I was enjoying the publicity. And then I met a great reporter named, thank you, Sandy Cullen. And she became my close friend who wrote articles about me. And she defended me when the Doshi was taken over. And so life here became very active. And when Joe left, I needed some friends, so I discovered the Neptune. And there was Bortsfield, and there was Kelly the bartender, who welcomed me with open arms. And I thought, I've got a whole new family. And they heard I was an artist, so I did the trademark for the Neptune, and I did other things. And I suddenly had a whole new coterie of friends. Some of whom I liked, some I didn't, but you know, it was great. It was wonderful. So I had the gay world, I had the straight world, I had the whole thing going in one big pie. And at school, I learned that some of the very straight instructors were not so straight. I will not mention names. And we had things going on. Then I learned a little bitchery of, oh, you don't have a PhD. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. So I thought, I don't need a PhD. I'm teaching special subjects. And I think most PhDs are very boring, but I didn't say that to them. So I was doing my thing. And finally, we went through several administrations. And new people would come in, and nothing changed. I still had my classes, they were filled. And my students were going on to other schools, like in Washington. Some were going to the West Coast. One wanted to be an animator. So I let him do animation things, and he went off to Hollywood. And I had others, and I geared it personally. And I finally thought, well, this isn't too bad, but I'm not doing enough work for myself, but I'm getting invitations. So I quickly would hustle a work or two, hustle those out, get in a show. Then I became a judge for art shows. They started me off at Franklin and Marshall. And then I went from college to college to college, and I was being judge of art shows. And I'm meeting more instructors, more heads of schools, particularly like the man from Franklin and Marshall, great guy named Sidney Dinas. He's dead now, but he was great. Then I'm friends with the museum here. And I was friends with Don Winner, who was the curator of fine art. He's also dead now. But at the time, he came to me one day and said, you know, I'm in a funny position by being the head of the department of the museum. People keep coming to me for appraisals, and I'm not allowed to do it because I'm a state employee. But then again, you're here. Suppose you have a little card and I give it out, and they go to you. So now I'm not only teaching, I've got people calling up saying, I've got this collection and my insurance agency wants me to have it appraised. I'm now going out, and I had a very simple way. I found that big galleries in New York, in the big auction galleries, charge a fee. So I knew I could charge a fee, but I didn't agree with what they were doing. New York had a really dirty act. They would charge the client a percentage of the evaluation they put on the price of the artwork. And I said, no, this is illegal. This is crazy. You don't do that. So I made a standard flat fee. I look at your artwork, this is the flat fee you pay me. And I got into many private homes. I can never tell you where or what, but hell, there's a lot of good artwork in this area. And some of it by pretty well-known people, past and present. And so I was having the fun of meeting these people, walking in the house. And I know a lot of them didn't think, well, he comes from Hack and Doshi, what does he know? But I walked in one on Hershey, and I got in the house, and they were asking me to come over because they had a Miro. They really had a Miro, a big one, and a glamorous $500 frame. But as I walked into the living room, the Miro is here, I'm facing the fireplace. And on the fireplace is a surrealist piece by Andre Masson, Abstraction. And the first thing I do is I say, wow, the first house I've ever walked in this area that had an Andre Masson. And the woman goes, my God, do you know what you're looking at? I said, why did you hire me if you don't think I know? That's an Andre Masson, and there's your Miro. You got good taste. You've got two hot people in your room. And so I'm lifelong friends with them. So I gave them a great evaluation. I went all over this area. I went upstate. I went out to Carlisle, all over the place. I then did the entire, Don Winter again said, I have a friend who works at Penn State College. He's the curator of minerals, rocks and minerals. There is such a thing. And he has a gigantic collection of paintings. And I said, why? And he said, well, people that did pictures of coal mines or factories and that, he inherits them. And he's got dozens of them. And they don't have an appraisal. For that matter, they don't really have an appraisal on things in other people's office. How would you like to do Penn State? So I'm saying, okay, I'll do Penn State. So I said, Bill, you're now my secretary. We'll go up to Penn State. You wear a suit and tie, I wear a suit and tie. We do the whole thing, and we start in. And then I know a professor up there will ask him if we can stay overnight. We're not going to go back and forth. So I start, and I find this, and it's right out of a movie again. I go to the Mineral Building, which is the far side of the campus. It's a huge building. I go in, I'm looking for the curator. It is crammed. I mean, literally crammed with rocks and stuff. And there's a little pathway down the middle of the building, wide enough for a human being. And at the far end was the man at his desk, surrounded by rocks. And I thought, okay, I've heard about things like this. So I talked to him, and he said, oh yeah, we got all these things. I don't know the value of any of them. And I began to look then. Then I went out in the main rooms, I see it. And he had a sizable, valuable collection. So I give him the appraisal. And I said, if you ever de-appraise things and you want to sell them, I will buy. I will scrape up the money to buy. You've got pictures of the river and steel mills that are fabulous. But who knows they're in your building? And he says, well, I don't know, I suppose, nobody. So I said, okay. Now I'm going around to the man who heads the weather department, you know, the Japanese. He at least was organized. Now we go to an English professor. And I open the door, and the floor of the office, which was huge, was covered with books with a little pathway. And there on the wall is a great painting of a steel mill. And I introduced myself, and he says, watch the books. I'm saying, yes, I see you have bookshelves. Why don't you, I wanted to say, why don't you use them? So anyway, I look at the painting. Again, I write it all up, I measure it, he takes the measurements and all that, and we see that. And I leave there and I said, these people are the crazy professors you hear about. And finally, I get to the head of the school. And by now I'm getting, who cares who it is? And the secretary said, oh, the president's in, he'll see you now. And so there's the president of Penn State. And I get in the office and I introduce myself. And I said, I'm the one doing an appraisal of your artwork. And I was told you have a very nice painting on the wall here. So I look, and there's this painting. It's of a streamlined train, pure 1930s. It's fabulous. And it's not in good condition. And I can't stop myself. How dare you let this get this way? And I'm talking to the president, and his secretary is drawing back, and I said, this is a crime. This is a valuable American painting, a valuable era. It's in bad shape. You've got to get help for it. And he backs off and said, oh, well, yeah, well, I'll have my secretary look into this and so on. And then Bill says later, that was the president you were yelling at. And I said, I don't care. The painting was wrong. So we go out, and I got this whole thing, and I did the whole appraisal. I typed it up, you know, they loved me. The genius was here who appraised everything. So now they hear about me at other colleges. So Franklin and Marshall calls me over and says, we have some paintings. And they have a mansion. The founder of Franklin and Marshall, there's a mansion, you would know about this, I suppose. And we have this terribly valuable painting over the fireplace of a Long Island scene. Boring thing of weeds and water, but the name was a big deal, you know. So I go over and they guide me to the mansion, and I walk in the room, and there is this painting over a fireplace that they obviously constantly use. There's soot all over the fireplace, and there sits the painting. And I just said, how dare you do this? And again, the person who was told to bring me over, I said, will you please tell them I'm screaming about this. You're wrecking that painting. It's worth X number of dollars. The fumes come up, the soot comes up, and you've got it there. Well, it's a place of honor. I said, no, it's dishonor. You're wrecking it. You can't leave it there. That's my note. And I wrote a note about it. Come out, and they said, we'll show you the next building. So now I go in another building, and there's a valuable painting over a radiator. And I said, you've done it again. You can't put an oil painting over, 2 inches from a radiator. The heat comes up, it dries the canvas out, it's canvas, it'll rot. And I give another speech. Finally, the third one was they take me to the lunchroom, student lunchroom. And there's a huge, huge canvas on the wall. Only it's not a canvas, it's one of those beautiful hand-done silks of George Washington on a horse. The flags, the whole bit is pure silk, and it's hanging on a wall with the sunlight pouring in on it. And again, I'm blowing my stack. So I write all this up, and I said, please give this personally to your head, Mr. Sidnadinas, and tell him my opinion. All 3 are in life danger. And I submitted my bill. Okay? Well, I don't know if they took my advice or not. Most people never do. So anyway, it's now a year later, and I get a call. It's Mr. Sidnadinas on the phone. He says, I'm the head of the Franklin Marshall. We have a slight problem. We use a big double garage across from the college as a storage room. And immediately I'm going, I'm afraid to hear what's happened. So he said, well, we have steam heat that comes from big tubes. The tubes running through there broke, and the steam has been pouring out for a day, and all of our paintings are stored there. So I said, Mr. Sidnadinas, you're not making this up, are you? And he said, no. And so a friend of mine was working there in the art department. So I telephoned her, and she said, oh yes, they really need you there. And now this is mid-August, and I go in. The people there were from the insurance company, and we're all in our jackets and ties. And I go in, and it's a steam bath. And I said, okay, guys, all shirts and ties off. We're going to be drowning. And he said, look at this place. I mean, look at you. Ever see anything like it? And I said, no, I hope I never do again. So I'm looking through this, and we're hundreds of paintings. And you take the measurements, you got to write the condition, And we're doing this, and I finally got to a point where I couldn't breathe. And I said, this is crazy. I said, they're sick for doing this. Why don't we have a new system? This one can be saved. This one is a total loss. An easier way, instead of my saying it's worth, once it's damaged, it's not worth what So the 2 guys said, oh, thank you, let's do it that way, sir. And I'm older, so I'm sir. Now out comes a big painting of a woman, and the paint is peeling off. And it's one of Andrew Wyeth's aunts. She paints. The whole Wyeth clan paints because of his name. And the paint is peeling off. And it's just not, and I put down destroyed. And I do my paperwork, and I submit my bill, and my friend calls up, do you know what you did? Do you know what you did? You said that a Wyeth painting was destroyed. It can't be destroyed. It's Andrew Wyeth's work. I said, no, no, it's his aunt. And it's peeling. The paint is literally peeling. And she says, I'm the one they're telling to take it to a restorer. And I said, lots of luck. So she put it in the back of her van, and by the time she got to Philly, more paint had bounced off. And she said to me later, she said, they restored it. And I said, no, they didn't. They repainted it. That's not called restoration. When big hunks are gone, that's not a restoration, and I won't put a heavy price on it. What's ever there now, you people got. So Mr. Medina heard the story, and he could laugh about it. And then I'm saying to her and to him, why? I'm in a garage and you're showing me tables full of rare Haviland china. Anyone coming in bumps the table, goes to china. So I said, you've got to do something about it. So hopefully they have. I've lost track of it.
Let's try going back to how you knew Hidley, how you met Hidley. And
I saw Hidley first at the Art Students League, but I didn't meet him. We're not doing it yet.
Go.
Now we are. All right. I saw Lee first at the Art Students League, and he was well known there, as you can imagine. He could never just walk down the stairs without a production. And so, but I never spoke to him. And it was quite a while. I would run into him in my Saturday meandering through the galleries. They would be Oscar Wilde, playing this role. And finally, one day we were both on 3rd Avenue, and I was going to a movie that played retro films. And there he came. So he smiled and finally said hello officially. Didn't speak again until years later when I was up in Maine. And the little fishing village where we went, Monhegan Island, has one street, one dirt road, and there was one little restaurant, and so you got to meet people eventually. So one day I'm walking down that road, and he's coming the other way, and I said, it's time we stopped and said hello to one another, and because he was staying there also. And that's how we officially met. And then, of course, when I was back in the city, I ran into him again, and then we started going out to dinner once in a while. We went out to the movies. We went to the theater. That was always a trial, because if he didn't approve of it, he would stalk out in the middle of an act or a ballet or something, and I would be left sitting there like everyone's looking at me, and he's just stamped out of the theater. So we had fun though. I enjoyed his company up to a point. But then it got to be almost a topping game. I would do something to annoy him deliberately. And, but he was a fountain of information about actors and actresses and plays and past performances and so on. And so I enjoyed his company. And we both pretty much liked the same artists. We went to galleries. Once in a while we might disagree violently, but not. And then he's the one who led us here in a sense, by bringing him down here is what led us, Joe and I, to consider moving here. Not where he lived, on the hill. Even I was smart enough for that one. But to find something. And I didn't care whether it was in Harrisburg or surrounding territory. I wish I had known more about the surrounding territory. He introduced me to Maya Shark, and I was interested because of her background, and we had both competed in an art show at some point, and I knew the name. I'd say Lee was, it was a good friend, but a strange friendship that we had. Very strange friendship we had. And from that, and my involvement with the people at the Neptune, the people at the Neptune, a lot of them formed a group that played volleyball down here in town. And I had never indulged in sports. I was very self-conscious. So once I saw them play on City Island, and I thought, your life is so different, why don't you try to join them and play volleyball? So I did a little bit of it, and I wasn't totally stupid at it, you know. And that was fine. Then when they played up here, that's where I saw Bill for the first time. Bill was playing volleyball, really playing volleyball, and I kept watching him. The hell with the volleyball, I was watching him. And I was trying to find out who he was, you know, because there was a lot of flirting going on during volleyball games. So finally, I don't know whether this happened before or after, but once I was, Ed Meals was a person who had a little restaurant on 2nd Street, and we go there for Sundays. And I was sitting at a table with another gay young man, and Bill was sitting at another table across the way with somebody, and the fellow I was with said, "Who do you like in the room?" And I said, "That one." I pointed to Bill, and he said, "Oh, you've got good taste." And I said, "Yes, why would I waste it on time, you know?" So I said, "No, that's the one I'm going to get involved with." He said, "How can you say that?" And I said, "I don't know, I just feel it's going to happen." So at that point, Bill had noticed me at the games, and I went one night to the Neptune, and as you remember, it was a very tight horseshoe-shaped bar, and you were standing against the wall, and as I walked in, I saw him standing against the wall on the right side in a sheepskin coat and a big cowboy hat, a denim cowboy hat, no less. And as I came slowly down toward the back of the room, I was just about to pass him. We had looked at one another. He put the cowboy hat on my head. And so I walked by, and that was our official talking to one another for the first time. And we hit it off from there. And at that time, Bill was driving a very cute little dump truck, a red truck, the little red truck. And so it was fun to travel around with him in the truck and steam the windows up on occasion, you know. So we both realized we liked one another, and we both got on very well together. So at one point I asked him if he would come to the house and do some private posing. Clever move, right? And he did, and that was enjoyable. And one thing led to another, and we've been a team ever since.
Do you remember what year it was that you first met?
Oh, I know he's going to do this again. What year was it?
That we met?
It's got to be in the 50s, mid-50s somewhere, 50s, 60s?
70s?
79.
79.
Oh, was it 70s already? All right.
No,
Well, then it, yeah, you, 70s.
79.
Oh, okay. All right. But in between, I had known a lot of people. Also, one of my favorite things to do was, in the old days, you did have gay newspapers, 2 or 3 different ones you could pick up at the bar, and they had a classified. I loved writing letters to unknown numbers. That was my big turn on. And I would get some of the strangest letters back. somewhat legitimate, you know, glad you liked my letter, let's get together, so on. Or the one who would type 7 pages of his fantasies. This was a bit much for me, but I really liked it, and I did meet some people that way. And I enjoyed the encounters, and it was very nice. Trouble is, most people were from California, Louisiana, Florida, you know, upstate New York. This wasn't a big help because I wasn't about to drive that far. But I did finally meet one man from Maryland. Now that was close. And he wrote a very, very intriguing letter to me. And we're still friends to this day. And I visited him over the years. We were going to make it twice a year type thing. It never got to be quite that because there were so many other things happening in between. And I was with Mr. Wonderful here, Bill. We both went to S&M activities. And he was very charming. He worked for the government in the health department. Was quite a whiz on the computer. Whiz isn't the word, a room with nothing but computers, you know, and couldn't get anything. And we just enjoyed one another's company back and forth. There was very little sex involved. We'd have dinner. Always he would treat me to an elegant dinner somewhere. And a little aperitif before you go to bed, you know, and so on. It was a unique arrangement. And he was so very formal. Glasses on a chain around his neck, you know. Always talking about his British friends because he was always going to London and he was going to Paris and he was going to Rome, all for the government. Lucky him. And so every time he would move, I'd have a new address, but he was always in the Baltimore area. And unfortunately, my life got more hectic, so did his. And finally, it was just a couple of years ago, after I've had my problems and everything, he said, I'm moving again from a lovely condominium to one further out in an exclusive gated community. And I'm buying that committee, I'm retiring. I'm buying that condominium, and I'm buying one in Fort Myers, Florida. And I thought, 2 condominiums are better than 1. And he said, yes, a lot of my relatives have condominiums in Fort Myers, and it would be wonderful. Why don't you plan on coming down to Fort Myers? And I said to Bill, would you really mind? And I will fly there. So we made all these arrangements. Bill even helped me get the plane tickets. I had my luggage packed. We go down to the airport, and I got my seating arranged for the plane and everything. And we come home to get the luggage for about 2 days later we were going to go. And it turns out there's an emergency call from my friend. He's in the hospital. He's in Fort Myers, but he's quite ill. He can't meet me at the plane, and it wouldn't be convenient for me to come down because we were going to go to the Ringling Museum for my benefit. We were going to go to that island with all the seashells on because I was a seashell nut. And so I never got to do it. So I said to Bill, oh, Jesus, I've got all this stuff packed. I've even sent a carton down of things that I knew you couldn't get on the plane. And I said, this is terrible. So I contacted him and I said, don't worry about it. We'll make it another time and so on. And he sent back and said, I'm paying you back your airfare. It's not fair that you paid to get tickets and I know they won't refund. So I'm sending you the $200 and some odd refund. And so I thought, I came that close to seeing those damn seashells on that island and being with him again. That would have been the nice thing. So since then, I've never done it again because my back keeps getting worse. And I thought, oh God, I could get on a bus probably and he could meet me when he's in Maryland. But I don't know how convenient that is, and then I don't know how active I could be. I know he would put up with it, but I don't know if I want to put up with the trouble when I have such good memories. So I send cards, he sends computer messages, which I could care less. I don't like computers. But anyway, that was one episode through the newspapers that really paid off. And it was very nice. And the little sex we had was nice. And the other S&M games were very nice, mutual back and forth. I still think of them very fondly. And I've never met another companion like that. I've gotten one letter from somebody in Syracuse, New York, who almost matches the same description, but I'm not going to drive to Syracuse. It's now too late in the game to play that. So that's what I enjoyed, though, the letter writing immensely, and the photographs we exchanged. It meant a lot to me, and I resent the fact that they don't do that, and everyone's on the computer. I will not get on the computer. Who wants to say outlandish things on a computer that anyone can read? No, no, no. This foolish I'm not, you know? I don't send funny photographs over the computer. I'll send you one in the mail, but I won't do it on the computer. I'm very upset about the government. I'm upset about privacy. Privacy is my thing, and I don't want the government or anyone doing this to me. And I can get quite hot under the collar. A few drinks and I can be very hot under the collar. And I won't put up with it. I won't put up with it for a moment. That's not the way an American should have to live. And you shouldn't have to be afraid to say something. It's going to be held against you, you know. So, no, this is not the way to live. And my friend in Maryland understands that, I'm quite sure. Maybe he will be dangerous on the computer. I don't know, but I won't. So that's the way that developed.
So did you have any other sort of long-term relationships other than Bill?
Close friendships, but not a relationship like Bill's. No, Bill was the one and only. I know that sounds dull, but it's the one and only. I really love him that much, and I loved him. And when I make a commitment, I usually stick with the commitment. And we have our moments when we argue, don't we? Yes, we do argue, but that's normal in any relationship. And Bill's very flexible. I've taught Bill to paint, and what kills me is when he finally understood the principles, and my house wasn't as crowded as it is now, he decides he wants to do it big. So we take a giant canvas, and he paints a big picture. And we have a friend who's a wealthy woman who has other friends, and she sees Bill's painting and said, I could sell that for you. And son of a bitch, if he doesn't sell it for $500, the first canvas. And I'm thinking, wow, Larry, aren't you lucky? Mr. Wonderful just sold this painting, and he does another one, and she buys it. And I'm sitting there with mine, and no one's buying anything. And I'm thinking, something is wrong with this equation, you know, but I'm pleased for him. Now the problem is to try to get him to do it again, you know. But, I mean, 2 successes in a row, and they were very good paintings, by the way. And he has another one that I'm trying to frame for him if he ever will do something to help me with it. I mean, he's thick as mud. And I'm saying that on camera and for his benefit. But we've had a good life together. And when things have happened to his family, the passing of his father, the passing of his mother, the passing of one brother, I was there with all of that. So I know what that's like. And that makes you closer when you survive things like that. My family is buried out on Long Island. His is buried in Hershey. So whenever Bill goes over to his grave, I go along with him, and Bill keeps it immaculate with flowers, and we did something slightly illegal. His brother died. His brother was a genius, mentally, who also got corrupted by his slightly older brother and became a drug addict. To such a degree, he wrecked his brain. And he was calling the government and accusing them of spying on him and all sorts of crazy stuff. Eventually, it got so bad, he was in the hospital, and Dick finally died in the hospital. So we had the cremation ceremony, and standing in our house for a long while was a unit. So I finally said to Bill, this is not right. This is not right for Dick. It's not right for you. Go to your mother's grave. No one's around. Dig a hole when you plant the flowers. Put the container with his ashes in the grave. And that will be closure for you. Mother, father, and son will be together. And Bill did that, and we do always remember him when we go there. The other brother that did the dirty work, Bill won't even talk to him. They never talked again. He still lives in Hershey. It's part of his family, but he won't. I have no relatives to do this stuff with, which is fine. So it's just Bill and I. And I didn't require a lot of other activity. I wasn't one of gallivanting around with endless people and endless things. That's quite satisfied. I really am satisfied doing that with Bill, fixing the house, if it ever gets fixed. God knows it doesn't get fixed. I work on it in bits and pieces, and I know what I want it to be, but it never quite gets there. But one of the things I do collect other artists' work, primarily artists of the Surrealist school. And as I said earlier, I think that I don't have a religious belief, but I do believe that fate or something puts you where you can obtain what you want, if it's reasonable. And I always end up someplace where there's a surrealist piece that I can manage to get hold of for my price range, or by accident, or whatever. And I have about 30 now. So I think 30 prove there's something working for me. Or I find books, or I find other things in the most impossible places, all having to do with the same subject. So I have a vast library, and I have about 30 surrealist works, including Dali, including Masson, including all the big Max Ernst. I've got them all. I got a lot of them in my bedroom, so when I wake up in the morning, there are my buddies on the wall. I've met a couple of the artists. I met Dali on a couple of occasions in New York. I liked him. I mean, the showman of all time, but I liked him. And the nicest image I had was, I was walking on Fifth Avenue one day going toward the Museum of Modern Art, and Dali was coming this way, and there was a woman with a little child next to me. And as we got even, Dali went down on one knee, holding his cane to shake the little boy's hand. The wife was just, she was going bananas practically, and I just stood there for a second watching it. And I thought, now the world doesn't expect Dali to do things like this, but there he was with a little boy, and this was sweet. And then another famous artist, there was a German artist who emigrated from Nazi Germany at the time, Kurt Seligman, again a surrealist, Gothic in style, came to the United States, wrote a great book on magic, which I haven't been able to locate, but I want to. And he never got the big publicity that he should have. I think he was just too shy. He wasn't a pusher, like Dali was a pusher and so on. But he was in big shows. The finest galleries had his work. And it was winter time, and it was Hidley and I, And there was a gallery called the Ruth White Gallery, Miss White Gallery. And he was having a show. And it was listed as, the last weekend of the show or something. It was snowing outside, and Hidley said, we've got to see Seligman's work. And so, and he did lots of etchings and that. So we got up to the gallery, and there was Mr. Seligman, wearing a heavy overcoat and a scarf and a hat. And I met him, and while Hidley was busy with Ruth White, I walked in another room where he had his etchings, and I said, you know, I've admired you all these years, and it's a great honor to finally meet you. And he said, oh, yeah, that's nice and all. And I had picked an etching that had a little rip in the top. And he said, oh, that can go at a very nominal sum. And I said, no, I want that, and I'll repair the rip. And it was called The Abyss, and it was a beautiful etching. And then there was another etching, and I bought that one. It was one-on-one. He never liked to pull proofs. I don't blame him, but he would do an etching, and he hated to pull the proof. In this case, he pulled one proof in red ink and never pulled the rest of the edition. So I bought that one. That was 101. Hidley bought a couple. We both said something else to him and we left. And about a month later, he took a shotgun and put it in his mouth and ended it. He had cancer. And to this day, he left his home as an art center in High Tor, New Jersey. It's up on the Jersey side. And to this day, you can tune in your computer and get the High Tor Art Center. And it's a place where people can go, older people, whoever, and learn how to be an etcher or an artist. And he left everything to them. And I thought that was beautiful. I met him. And that made my life. And it happened many times. Museum of Modern Art, the man who painted the black and the big colored squares, one over another.
Leonard Baskin, you met?
There's a famous artist who painted
She said Rothko?
giant Rothko. And that was just before Rothko died, and I didn't know that. But we were walking through again, and he comes around the corner, and I said, Rothko. And he said, yes, I am. You know, and we shook hands, and there was another person with her, and he talked, and we said, oh, we came to see your show. It was his last show we didn't know that, but it was his last show, and he had reverted to black, white, and gray. And so I said, oh, this is interesting that you're doing this sort of thing, and so on. And we had a nice little conversation, and then he dies. And so, yeah, but I have those memories that I was at the right spot to at least meet them. They were real people. Pollock, the same. At the Pollock's height, he was I've read his biography, he was a very disturbed man. Very disturbed man, uptight. But near the end of his life, if you went to see his show on a Saturday, the floor was covered with young people. They were all sitting there like they're worshiping. And the day I went, there was Pollock standing with his back against the wall, just looking at this sea of people, and there was his canvases near the end of his life in black and white. There was something about when the artist is reaching his near death, color is gone, and now he had heads that you could see. Inside the skeins, if you look close, there were human heads. And then it was shortly after that he died in the accident. And I thought, oh my God, again, it's just before the end, he painted in black and white. Very moody man. I didn't talk to that one. I saw him. You didn't disturb him. But I'd read enough about him to let him alone. Don't do anything. So being in the city and seeing these people and actually talking to them or seeing them on the street, that meant a lot to me. I'm part of a real world of real people. They're not names in a book. They hurt, they laugh, They're sad. They're incredible people. And I would not change my life for that. I would not change my life from being gay. I see nothing wrong with it. I think it's been an enriching life. At Hack, I had good times at Hack as a teacher. I enjoyed the students immensely. I did not enjoy a lot of my fellow teachers, or mostly the snobbishness of some of them, not all of them. And I also did not like what happened at the end of the career. They got rid of whoever was the head, I can't remember his name. He left and they did a search for a new person. For the sake of this tape, I won't mention who they hired, but they hired a man from out of state who claimed to be married with 2 children, and he claimed to come from New England. The eventual truth was he was gay. He came from Jersey. After he signed the contracts, the woman and 2 children disappeared, and his lover appeared, who he called his cousin. It wasn't his cousin. He came in, he was dictatorial. He bought a house right next to the bar on Third, on the
Strawberry or
it was the Strawberry then.
yeah.
He bought that house. He forced when it was beginning to be known that he was gay, you could feel that on the campus. He was also dictatorial. And the first thing that he did wrong was he decided to have a housewarming party and invite all the people from the bar and the instructors of PAC, including my secretary and other people. And they were outraged. I didn't get the invitation. But the next day she was livid that she was exposed to people, flaming queens from the bar and so on. Now, okay, she was an older woman, I can understand that, but it was a dirty trick on his part, very dirty trick. And the next big move he made was he was going to show the board of directors of the college how much money he could save them. Now, this is where if I had read my contract, I would have known. Everyone had the same contract. So what he did was he called every English professor, or he had someone do it, and give them a choice. Either you would take, as of tomorrow morning, an early retirement, or I fire you. So the poor English department was decimated overnight. And of course they all took early retirement, but they were screaming about it. And the doshi was then actually on Cameron Street in an office building. And the phone rang and I picked it up. And it was one of the men who were in my department and said, "I hate to do this to you, Larry, but the director of the school has told me to tell you you're fired. Pick up your things tomorrow morning, you're out." That's when I learned the contracts we had signed gave the head of the school the right to fire anyone, any day of the week. He didn't have to have a reason. The reason being, of course, if you wiped everyone out, you had to replace the English professors with people out of school at minimum wage. You do it to the art people, you have to get a whole new art department, and you can do it at minimum wage. Well, I invented new dirty words to say on the telephone to the man at the other end. Now, I know it wasn't his fault. He said, "Well, I've got 4 sons ready for college." I said, "I know it's not you," but I named the head of the school and I said, "This is what I think of him." I called his secretary because sometime previously I'd made an appointment to see him. And the woman gets on the phone and I said, "I'd like to keep my appointment with the president." Oh no, there's no such appointment here. There's nothing on the books about you being to see the president. And he doesn't want to see anybody anyway. I said, I know. I'm sure he doesn't. I said, but I want to see him. He was actually afraid of someone shooting him, I'm sure. And so I said, okay, I'll clean out. So I cleaned out my stuff. The young lady who taught pottery making, she was cleaning out, she was in tears. And it was going on, it was a terrible scene. And just before this happened, the full-time professors had taken a vote. They took votes once in a while in hopes of getting a raise. Fat chance that was. Bill and I are now on City Island one Sunday, walking around. And surprisingly, the head of the school turns up with his lover. And they're in a car, and we're walking by to our car. And the president of the school sees me and says, good morning. And I wasn't going to acknowledge him, but I did. And he walked to our car. He was interested in Bill, not me, Bill. And he's eyeing Bill up and down. And I said, you do know there's a meeting being held today of the professors. And he said, yes, someone told me that. And I said, I wouldn't be too high horse if I were you. Well, they're locals. I said, no, don't be snobs about locals. They're full professors. They're intelligent men, and they know what they're doing. They're unhappy with you and the whole thing. And you might think of what could be going on behind you. So I get in the car, we start to drive away, and Bill goes out the window like that to him, and he saw it. Well, need I say, he wasn't happy. Bill didn't care. Bill was willing to go back and punch him. And I said, no, we don't do that. I said, there's something happening, and it's bad enough I'm getting fired, you know, the whole thing. So someone said, are you going to go out and back and be helpful and to anybody? And I said, no, I'm never setting foot on campus again. I said, this is a terrible thing that's happened. Now we go to a Christmas party, and the guy who was a lousy instructor, he was the only other full-time employee outside of Socolo at the time. And he was teaching pottery making without knowing anything about it. And he was teaching how to mix glazes. His background was working for the General Electric Corporation in mixing paints. So they hired him to be a pottery expert. Well, naturally, they fired him. We're at a Christmas party. His daughter turns out, and she sees me, and she goes into hysterics. Larry, you've got to save my father's job. And I said, you're a screwball. I can't save your job. I've been fired. They've all been fired, including your father. And your father's a son of a bitch to begin with. Oh, you can't say that. And I said, forget it, I said that. What she didn't know was Daddy taught photography at the time. He also had a thing, and my students they liked me, so they would tell me stories they wouldn't tell anybody else. So this one girl was talking to me one day, and she says, you know that guy, and I'm not saying his name again, you know the guy who teaches the pottery thing? We all know how to get an A+. I said, oh, you do pottery? She says, no. You take off your brassiere, you have a dress that's open, and you lean over the desk while he's putting your mark down. So your breasts are showing. She said, guaranteed to get an A every time. And she said, you know those trips we take to the woods? Did you ever think of what he might do with a camera? Some of us were asked to undress. Now, he was married to a nurse and had a daughter and another. And I thought, oh my God, there's more lechery going on here than even I knew about. So I said, I can't save your father. I can't save myself. I don't even want to see your father again. I now know more than I ever wanted to know, and I hated him to begin with, okay? So I said, okay, this is it. I'm now out of a job, but I now can run the doshi if I want, and that paid a small salary, so I eventually got to where Maya had died, other people didn't want the job, so I took over the job to run the doshi full-time. Instead of just being an advisor, I was now the actual head of the thing. So I was in there every day, 5 days a week or 6 days a week, running that organization and trying to upgrade it, trying to have the juried shows, talking to artists, talking to people, talking to the newspapers. I mean, it was a full-time job for very little money, but I didn't want to see it fail. And then we got to be pretty good. I began concentrating outside. And we had a board of directors. And after that experience, never again in my life will I ever work for anybody with a board of directors. Either I am the sole kingpin and I make the decisions, or we do not have an organization. Now that sounds dictatorial, but you go through sweat when you had a lot of lame brains around you, one of them being very gay, a woman who won't admit she's a lesbian, but she's a lesbian. Now she lives as one. The gay number was an arrogant man who didn't like the arts to begin with. And they were ganging up, and I didn't know it at the time. So we were getting out-of-towners, we were making sales to out of the country. We had famous people sign, like one of the women sculptors of our time who was very well known. She's one of the guests who've been to the doshi. I didn't even know her. And we've got all of this going. And that's when the gay number, we had two gay numbers. We had the man who was on the board of the museum. He's just retired a couple of months ago. Oh, you worked for him. Okay. The organization was doing very well. Not financially, we never were. We were on the edge. But people gave us gifts once in a while, which were very nice. The doctor from the sports into the West Shore.
Jason Litton.
Jason Litton. He gave us things. He acted as a judge because he collected prints and stuff. He let us use his house for a fundraiser. We used a few other people, and then Warden allowed us to use a house also. We had good people. It was a shame that we had to have this, and it was done in the way they did it was very nasty, and I will never forgive David for it. But one night, we had a show just installed. People from Penn State were in the show and others. And suddenly I was told there was to be a meeting at the doshi. And the young woman who I said was a lesbian called me and said, oh yeah, there's a special board meeting we're calling. Well, when I got there, I was there. David arrived. He arrived with the young lady and another young lady, a prominent woman's daughter, who dressed as a lesbian. She wasn't a lesbian, but she came with no makeup. She had her hair cut very short. She had a coat on and a tie. And I thought, oh, she knew how to get to David. David was very easily swayed I don't care whether this is on here or not, very swayed by lesbians. And this was a woman pretending to be one to get him, okay? So he said, "You're fired. I've had someone rewrite the rules of the doshi, and one of the new things legally is I have the right to fire you. And as of this moment, you're fired." And I said, "Oh, can I see the letter?" And he says, "Certainly, here's the letter with my signature." And I said, "Good, now it's mine. And now it goes to the newspapers." "Oh, no, give me the letter back." I said, no, this is the letter firing me with your little signature. And that's going to the newspapers. And you're going to have a fight. And so he said, "Well, I'm terribly sorry, but this is the way we feel. You are no longer wanted here." And the woman who's pretending to be a lesbian, she agrees with him. So I said, "Okay." And they walk out the door. And I'm with Bill, and I said, "This is a real mess. Well, let's leave." So I leave, and Bill leaves. The lesbian goes back with a chain and lock and puts it on the door of the doshi and locks it. So I can't get back in to the gallery, even though my things are there and so on. Well, that's all that had to happen. Then I called the newspaper reporter. I told her what was going on, and she said, "I'm writing this up." And I sent the letter to every one of the TV stations and the radio stations. I sent it to WITF with my own note and said, "This is the payback of working for the doshi. And this is underhanded." And so the word spread around town. The reporter interviewed me. The next day when I tried to get in, of course the gallery was locked. And I made a thing of that. So then artists began making cartoons and passing them out about that. And I had the artists outraged. Then the artists started saying, "We're resigning from the gallery. We're turning in our membership." Well, David was back there and there was a show on. And the artists wanted their work back. Now David was in there the next day and said, "You can't have your work back without a photo ID." The artists, "Come on, what is your photo ID crap?" Well, he did that and made it more enemies than he wanted. And they took the work out. And then a lot ripped up the membership cards. And within no time at all, 90% of the membership resigned. That left doshi with a few out-of-towners and no income. No income at all. And he had egg on his face. "What are you doing with a room when you can't pay the rent? The artists won't submit paintings. The artists that were there took all their work home." And the reporter now kept after Forney in the paper, and at a public party, he threatened the reporter. Real brainy thing to do, right? And he said to her, "I'm going to get you fired." And she said, "The hell you are. I'm going to write more stories about you. You can't write about me." And she said, "Yes, I can. You're a news story." And so she wrote more. And he was getting more livid and more upset. The other people I saw, those that were on my side, consoled me and were with me. Then we knew who weren't. Your friend, the other people that he got. And so the doshi fell apart. And that was the end of it. It couldn't revive. And I was sad for that. I was sad for the artists. I was sad for myself. We did a lot of hard work. And to have someone do this, well, Bill knows all the curse words I use and all the threats I make and so on. An incident did happen later after this. Forney was scared silly of him, of Bill. We went to the Neptune one night for a drink, and we were sitting on the far side of the bar. Forney comes in, sitting on the other side, across from us, without knowing it at first. He looks up, and there's Bill and me, and I'm pointing him out to Bill, and Bill's looking really angry. Forney started on a drink, put it down, and ran out of the gallery, out of the bar. At which point, several people in the bar came over and said, "That's the best show we've ever seen. That so-and-so got what he deserved." And Bill said, "I wasn't going to do anything." He said, "No, they all thought you were going to punch him." And that's what, so since that day, we've never, I don't see Forney at all. I've always wished I'd run into him. I'd like to punch him, you know. But a strange person, a vindictive person, who really thought he was God, who could do things, and he didn't. So the rent was due. The Doshi could no longer pay the rent. Artists took their work home. The things that were left in storage, I don't know what happened to those. They probably were auctioned off someplace. And the Doshi was finished. It was a legend. It was over with. And I was glad I had so many friends in the gay bar who all were willing to kill Forney if they could. And at which point I said to Bill, "All right, there's other things to do. We'll do other things, you know." But it's a shame that the one group I liked and I wanted to be part of was destroyed. In the meantime, other things happened as far as the arts go here. I don't know if I should talk about some of them or not. There were lots of dirty tricks pulled. There were many different things going on and that I didn't think were very legal. And if there's anything, you know, if you do something, tell me about it. Be honest about whatever it is you did. Don't deny it, and yet everyone knows you did something. I had a couple of incidents like that. And it's sad. Because of it, I don't speak to the people, and one of them's in the art world here. And I won't speak to them ever again. If you can't be honest about what you did, it was to try to get money out of me, and she did. It was a woman. And I don't want to deal with people like that ever again. And while I worked for the framing shop, one of the people from Hack came in to have some work restored by me, and she was very sorry what happened. She said, "You know, if you apply now, they'd take you back in a minute." And I said, "No. I've been bitten once, and it was a dirty affair, and my days at Hack are over with." And I said, "You know, when they did that at Hack, the reason he got away with it was the members of the board of directors were from the Patriot News, they were from the TV stations, they were all those outlets, and none of the story ever got in the paper. My firing, yes, but other things that went on, illegal things that went on, everyone knew, and no one said a word. And yet they hired new people, and if they had wanted to, they could have had a scandal as good as Penn State. But they didn't. And to this day, people will say, "We knew, but we didn't want to be the ones who talked." And by then, the culprit, the head of the school, they bought his contract out. He was making more money than the Secretary of Education had had. They bought his contract. He went to Florida and bought a mansion. Did the same routine there. Did many other things which I know about, but I won't bother saying. Came back and had now bought himself a new house up in Maine and is either retired or he's doing the same tricks and leading the same vulgar gay life up there. But no one talks. I learned that in this community early. There was a thing about Harrisburg when I'm off my own life, but no, it's my life. The museum opened on 2nd Street. The one that's building the new museum up here.
Oh, Susquehanna Art
Yeah.
Museum. Yeah.
When they opened, they had, now wait a minute, I'm losing myself on the story. I lost myself
You're
from
getting tired is what I think.
I'm getting tired from that. I'm thinking of all the dirty work that was done.
We can do
I'm
more.
trying to think, but
We can come
it,
back again.
I should put all this in a book, or as I said, a TV script and make money off it.
It should be
No,
on record, there's no question.
no, the thing about the museum there, what the hell was that all about? He lived to it, Mr. Barann here.
Keeler? Reverend Keeler? You mean the museum? Oh, no, Susquehanna.
The one on on 2nd Street, where I had my one-man show.
What about it? What about it?
There was something terrible happened there too. You mean we're now getting to a point where we don't remember? I know I had a good show there, but that wasn't it.
The Art Association and the museum, is that what you mean?
Well, that was another one.
Reverend Keeler?
Oh, I might as well tell that one, I don't care. I was sitting at home one day, and the telephone rang. And it was the person who heads the Art Association. And she said to me on the telephone, "You've got to make a quick call to the museum, to the woman who runs the painting department." And I said, "Oh, I know her quite well. We're friends. I've done some research for her and I've appraised things." She said, "You've got to make the call today." And I said, "No, I'm busy. I'll call her at my leisure." And I hung up the phone. Well, a day goes by and she's on the phone the next day. "You didn't call the museum." And I said, "Why?" And she said, "I think they want to get a work of yours." And I said, "Then why are you calling me?" And she said, call them. So I got off the phone, I called the head of the museum, and I said, "I'm getting these calls from the Art Association that for some unknown reason, with no exhibit going on, you people have suddenly decided you want to own one of my works." And she said, "Oh yeah, that's right, we want one of your paintings, one of your pastels." And I said, "Oh, okay. Why is the other place calling me?" She said, "Oh, I don't really know." And I thought, oh, now this is a lie. So I said, "Okay, how do we do this?" And she said, "Well, I could come to your home, or you could bring it to my house, or you could bring it to the Art Association." And a red light bulb went on in my head, and I thought, oh yeah, I'll bet I could. If I bring my artwork to the Art Association, and you come from the museum to make a judging, they get a cut. And she said, "Oh, do they? And I said, "I tell you what, you give me a pass. I'll drive 3 pieces in, I'll park my car, and I'll come up with a pass and my 3 works, and you choose one." "Oh, yes, oh, that could be convenient for you, couldn't it?" I said, "Yeah, that could be real convenient." And I did it. I came in, I came with a pass, I got in the museum, I put the 3 pieces out. She was there, and her assistant was there, and I knew which of the 3 I wanted. I arranged it. Oh, the assistant picks the other one, and so on. And she finally said, and which one do you want? And I said, oh, the one called Self-Portrait with Snapshots. I wanted to have a reminder of me in the museum. And she didn't get the irony of that. And I said, pick that one. And she said, all right, we'll pick that one. And then, this is where I get a little stupid. She said, and what is the price of this? Because no one had mentioned money. And I said, well, my usual price is $1,500 for something that size. But I know you're the museum and you don't have a big budget. I'll cut it a little bit. Stupid ass. I cut it down a little bit. And she said, we'll be sending you a check. I go home and I say to Bill, guess what? My self-portrait with snapshots is in the museum. I'm getting paid. And the time goes by, and the time goes by, and the time goes by, and I don't get a check. Finally, a check comes, and it's from the Art Association. And it's for $666.66, which is also the sign of evil, right? I hold off, and I said, this is signed not by the museum, this is signed by the Art Association. I've just been screwed out of quite a sum of money. And I said, I'm not happy. I'm not going to cash it. So I didn't cash it for quite a while. My roof starts to leak and so on, and I need that. And I said to Bill, I can't hold off, I need the money. I go to my bank, and my bank, the young person looks and says, oh my God, it's from Satan. I said, you might say that. Yes, I think this is from Satan. Just cash it. Put it in my account. So they do, and I'm waiting for Carrie to make the, well, you know who it is now. Waiting for the call. Don't get the call. I try to contact the museum group. No. Nobody will answer me. Nobody will contact me. So what it means is the Art Association needed some quick money, and what better way to do it is we sell something to the museum through the Art Association. They get a picture, and Larry gets $666 from it. And of course, Larry will go along with this. And I wouldn't. So I called someone at the Art Association and told them the dirty plot. Well, then they passed the word around. And to this day, I've never spoken to Carrie again. Her husband says hello. She comes over and tries to shake hands, and I withdraw. And when we're out somewhere and she meets me, I withdraw. And that's how the dirty game is played in Harrisburg. That's one of the games. Oh, the other museum game is a brief one. When they did the museum down on 2nd Street, okay, Mim Warden was involved. And they're looking for a curator. So they find this curator in Iowa or somewhere. The man moves his family, his children, all up to Harrisburg. He puts the kids in school, he buys a house, he's now the head of the museum, and he starts making judgments about what he's going to do with the museum. Mim decides, no, Mim's way will be done, not his. So she fires him. And he must have had a contract like mine that said, goodbye. So now he has to pull his kids out of school, he has to sell the house, and he left town. And when I asked where he went, no one knows where he went. No one knows about it. It's not on TV. It's not in the newspaper. No one knows anything. He vanishes. I'm saying to Bill, this is interesting. You vanish. When I did the doshi, I'm saying, I'm not vanishing. When that happened afterwards, I said, I'm not vanishing. This boy stays in town. And sure enough, there was another episode of this. They had, it's all disappearing out of my mind now. Oh, Channel 27 had an announcer for years, a very nice news announcer. I used him once as a thing for one of my auctions. Nice guy. One night he's not there. And other people that work with him, no one said, so-and-so is no longer with us. He was fired and out. No one was allowed on this program to say goodbye, or we miss Harry, he was a nice guy, whatever his name was. Nobody ever mentioned him being alive. Yet, Bill sees him at the grocery store one day. He's still here, but he's dead now to the public. He's not on the station. He's not being mentioned. And I said, here we go. The thing in Harrisburg is if they don't like you, you're out and you're dead. And I stayed again and again and again. And I still am here again and again. And so this is what I've learned here about being straight or gay. It made no difference. Almost everyone I've met has not cared whether I was gay or not. I tell people this to their face if they want to know. I never went shied away from saying I'm a gay person. I say basically, yeah, I'm gay, and Bill's my lover, and we live together. And we don't have man and wife bid. The Justice of the Peace said, I now join the two of you together. We didn't place games like some men do. Oh, I'm the wife and he's the husband. So, in the New York Times, they do that. It's crazy. I don't play those games. We're two guys. We like one another. We go to bed together. And I think that is the important way to be. It's important to be truthful in life. I want students to be truthful. If you're going to criticize artwork, I'm honest. If you ask me if I like something, I'll tell you point blank, or I'll tell you what I think's wrong with it. But I'm not going to go around and flatter. Hitler was a flatterer. Any woman who, was interested in being with him, I don't mean to be cruel, but it could be crap, and he would be telling they've got great talent underneath it all, So I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it to Lee with his work or him with my work. I said, if you don't like it, say so. If I don't like yours, I'm going to say so. You've done better. We all do good things and we do things that are not so good. But be honest about it. And then when I see officials, in government playing these roles, I get livid. He says, oh, you watch the news too much. Well, I watch it and I get livid at people lying. Don't lie. We're not stupid at this end of the camera, We're alive and we're well, and we know what goes on. And when a politician is playing games. When somebody else is playing games. And I don't want to put up with that. As a gay person, I preferred people who were gay openly, and I liked them, or I didn't like them. Okay? I met lots in bar rooms. I've met them where I've gone other places. Sometimes I'm very friendly. Sometimes I don't want to be near them. It depends. If you're going to be I call it a screaming queen in public, in a room full of straight people, that's a dumb thing to do. You're going to offend somebody in the room. Just be a normal guy for a while. It won't hurt, You don't have to do the gay routine. When you're in the gay bar, be as funny as you want, be as gay as you want. But be reasonable about it. And there are plenty of people I've met who I'm sure are gay, but who appear very straight to me. I don't care whether I know where they are or they aren't. And this is an attitude I have, and I will continue with it. I'm not going to change at this point. And I think that, Harrisburg, I've met some very nice gay people. I think the Bortsfield in the bar was good. I think other people I've met are good. Some others I've met that aren't. And I think there was a great number who were very foolish about drugs and very foolish about sex. Very foolish. And some of them were very people I was close to that I look forward to seeing all the time. I love being with them. I didn't go to bed with them, but I liked them. And now they're all gone. And I really feel very sad every time I think of them. I have their photographs, I have little notes, or I find a note now and then that they've left for me. And I think it's so sad because they were all younger than me.
Are you referencing HIV?
AIDS. You're talking about AIDS?
What?
AIDS?
AIDS.
HIV,
Mostly,
yeah,
all of it
mostly,
was AIDS.
yeah.
Once in a while there'd be a suicide, but usually you could trace it back to AIDS, that they couldn't manage and they committed suicide. But AIDS was the biggest one of all. And I hope they find the greatest cure. They're doing this African thing, if they can find something there, find something for AIDS, or at least get people educated enough. For God's sake, I said it as a joke, but not a joke. When all these Mexican kids were coming over and so on, what you should send back are several carloads, truckloads of condoms. Convince the Mexicans and some of the others you don't need 7 children if you can't afford to feed them. You're not going to send them across the American border. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for children. They're in the middle. But when I see that and I hear, oh, they've got 6 kids, 7 kids, I don't care what the tradition is among Catholics in Latin countries, knock it off. You don't need it. Watch the TV. Or wear a rubber. Give them the truckload and say, this is how you put it in Spanish. This is how you put it on. It doesn't take a genius. But I get angry when I see that. I get angry about the children. And they say, oh, the president didn't go down to see them. Good. I wouldn't have gone down either. They didn't belong there. And I'm sure there were very many nice Mexican kids. They're caught in the middle of a terrible political world. But I blame their own countries. I blame that. I blame the Catholics for it on occasion. The Catholics have got to make a bigger thing about, if you're going to be that way, wear a rubber. Whether you're gay or straight, use it. You know, I think the current Pope, there's hope for him, that would like to get around to that, I'm sure, being practical. But don't let it go on and on and on and destroy all these very wonderful lives that I've seen and the wonderful people I've known. And I don't know. I'm glad it hasn't hit us, knock wood. We don't fool around that way. And I don't want to see people hurt. And I would like to see the arts flourish here. I'm glad the mayor's got finally a bookstore that's really a bookstore, you know. I almost fainted when I walked in there and saw real books. I think there should be more good bookstores, not just the others. There should be more outlets for the arts. And I don't mean just old people doing something in a home somewhere like I see on TV. You know, real art. Have real exhibits. Encourage people to go out of town. Do you know what I had to do as a teacher? I'd say, this weekend in Maryland, go down and look at a show. There's 3 big museums. Oh, well, you got to drive through. I'm saying, you all have cars. It's an hour and a half away. Go down and look at real art. I don't want you to just look at a book. Look at a real painting, real size. And there's a wonderful museum. I did this in Mechanicsburg. They invited me to give a lecture, talk to smart kids in a high school. But first of all, very few smart kids turned up to hear me. And I said, go down to a place called the
Visionary Art Museum.
Museum of
Visionary Art Museum.
Visionary Art. I said it's got artwork by people who are mentally ill, those who are fixated, some of them are drug addicts, some aren't, but look at a whole new field of art. And all you gotta do is get in your car and go down. And they have a student price to get in. The building is fantastic. It's not even government run, it's privately run. It's a smart woman who has good friends. And she put it together. It's the only one in the world, and you're an hour and a half away. And I'll say, there's the big museum, another one, you're in Philly. I said, why the hell do you think I moved here? It's a center point. I can go to New York, I can go to Philly, I can go to Baltimore, I can go to Washington, I go to Pittsburgh. It's a center spot. The mayor wasn't thrilled when I did that in a speech at City Hall. Well, we're wonderful here. I wasn't saying we weren't wonderful. I just was saying Harrisburg's a jumping off spot. And you got all this culture surrounding you. And none of you will go anywhere. You won't look at a textbook. And I said, you know, the famous ones of Pollock, they're big. They're not little things with little wiggles. They're big paintings that fill a wall. You have to walk up close and walk back and get the effect.
I tell you what, if we keep going, I have to do something about your mic, because you're hitting it and it's
Oh,
rubbing.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to do that. All right, am I finished?
I think maybe we'll wrap it up if that's okay with you.
Okay, fine, wrap it up. Wrap me up. I'll take a drink of water now.
I want to thank you for giving us all your time and
Well,
your
I'm giving
great
you a lot of
stories.
dirt.